He allowed himself to be blindfolded, his hands tied behind his back, creating the illusion of his helplessness, and he himself waited with interest for the development of events. The beauty, delighted with his pliability, wondered what she could do, because this man was now completely in her hands. He was in front of her. Ryan Floyd Calabria is the beloved princess of the most powerful empire and the youngest and most skilled commander in the history of the empire. He was not only a skillful warrior in everything, he was superbly educated and had a deep knowledge of the humanities, and literature was his passion. But the noble young man, the only representative of the family, had a flaw that was not characteristic of men of his age. He was absolutely indifferent to women, including the beautiful princess. Ryan was supposed to be the princess's fiancé, but at the moment it seemed impossible what to do. The spotlight illuminated the young blonde woman on the stage, Lady Sarant, surrounded by admirers, shouting out the final phrases of her new romance. The ladies in admiration, watching and listening, repeated the last phrases of the book in chorus after her. Lady Sarant, despite the tightly surrounding suitors, noticed a girl sitting alone through the crowd. It was Baroness Eleanor Maris herself, Lady Sarant's main rival, and she stared at her, which infuriated the lady. In her anger, Lady Sarant found nothing better than to mock the Baroness, accusing the girl of having come to steal the plot of the novel from her. The flow of accusations and ridicule was interrupted by a bowl of cookies and a cup of tea flying right at her, pretty much soiling her chic dress. Lady Sarant was outraged by the Baroness's impudent act. She yelled at her that she had ruined an expensive dress. The Baroness smiled and allowed herself to remark that the carpet had also suffered a lot because of her trick. Meanwhile, a servant ran to the noise, hurrying to find out what had happened and whether help was needed. Without specifying what had happened, he rushed to remove the shards from under Baroness Eleanor's feet so that the girl would not cut herself and step into the mud. In turn, the girl carefully handed the servant her handkerchief so that he could wipe his hands. The young man politely refused, and the men who fought appreciated her noble gesture. Surrounding the Baroness, they vied with each other to ask if she had hurt herself. They all wanted to please the beautiful Eleanor, inviting her to sit down and rest. In response to their responsiveness, the girl thanked the men for their care, calling them real gentlemen. The assembled men were ready to follow the beauty to the end of the world and begged her to let them into the hall to listen to her. But she hastened to stop them, saying that her novels were intended only for women's ears. The Baroness reassured them by promising to see them at the banquet. The fans left disappointedly, and the door closed quietly behind them, and the Baroness ordered those present that she was now ready to show the recordings, because of which Lady Sarant dared to accuse her of theft. To which the lady replied that the Baroness did not have the experience that would allow her to create novels about love. Paying no attention, but sharp remarks, she told the audience that she was ready to tell a truly real love story. When she had finished her magnificent performance, she modestly retired. Her faithful assistant Graham again admired her great talent, and then she noticed that Lady Sarant had not sold any of her books, but that the girl had replied that it had to happen at some point. Jem was still going on with her admiring speeches, and the Baroness was thinking thoughtfully. Once upon a time, Khandahan was called, and she could barely make ends meet working as an editor in a fashion magazine. But for 5 years now, she has been living under the name of the heroine of her favorite book by Eleonora Maris. This story sank into her soul, and she constantly reread it. The girl was deceived into marrying the cunning and depraved Baron Maris, who died of syphilis in prison, which later turned into a tragedy for his young wife. Due to the terrible deeds of her husband, to whom she was related by blood, she found herself surrounded by demons that she had to cope with. Her terrible situation worsened more and more. She was exhausted by poverty and tormented by her surroundings. But she decided not to spare herself in order to distract herself. From the unenviable position in which she found herself by the will of fate, she began to write delightful novels about love, and soon her work made a splash. She had many followers and imitators who wanted to profit from her talent. She always remained unique and the only queen and became the greatest celebrity of the empire. Baroness Eleanor now had boundless fame and money. She was proud that she had achieved everything on her own. It began to seem to her that now she could live in peace and prosperity, no worse than other people. Until one day, Graham told her that a mysterious and important letter had arrived in her name. The Baroness wondered why the assistant was so excited that she had seen such a thing on the envelope. When the girl took the envelope in her hands, she saw the seal of the Empire's power. With excitement, the girl thought of the sender. A question ripened in her mind, the answer to which betrayed the name of the Duke of Calabria. In the Hastgadr Empire, everyone knew that the Duke was the most powerful and influential person who concentrated the power and authority of a huge state. The Baroness ran through the lines, and the letter was indeed from the Duke of Calabria. In the letter, the Duke wrote about his son, Count Ryan of Calabria, who asked for help in solving the problem. Her eyes ran over the lines, and what she had written struck her more and more. The letter addressed to her contained a very delicate request regarding the famous Ryan Calabria. At first, the Baroness was struck by the proposal it contained, but then, casting aside all doubts, she made up her mind. A few days later, at the Calabria residence, Count Zeppelin came to an audience with the Duke. He was extremely excited. Herzog said that it would be about his son, whose problem requires an immediate solution. Lately, the Duke had indeed been extremely concerned about his son's behavior. Indeed, the behavior of the Duke's son was a big headache when it came to procreation. The Count fully agreed with him. The young heir caused concern. Ryan Floyd Calabria, the most talented knight commander in the Empire despite his young age. The heir to two ancient and powerful families, he admired everyone with his martial art. The Calabria clan on his father's side, famous for his military skill and success in battle. Rhoda Floyd on his mother's side, who became famous for his accumulated humanitarian and scientific knowledge. He is known throughout the Empire for his unparalleled beauty and powerful intellect as a knight commander. The Count still could not believe that the young heir in his 20s was in such trouble. The Duke was extremely concerned about rumors that his son at that age was not at all interested in women, which he shared with the Count. These rumors were confirmed by the ladies shipping him, who confirmed that he had absolutely no interest in them, and he already needed to choose a worthy candidate. Count Zeppelin said that there was only one woman who matched the young man. Of course, this is the imperial princess, who is distinguished by her beauty and high-born ancestors. The Duke fully agreed with him, but he was tormented by the question of how to do it. But if you think about it, you can find a solution, and you just need to turn to the right person. For political decisions, you need to turn to Viscount Wellington. You need to consult on economics with Count Johnson. If the clan is overtaken by a curse, you need to go to Sister Michelle. When it comes to the relationship between a man and a woman, you need to turn to Baroness Eleanor. The Duke expressed doubts about whether his son would listen to the famous, but just a society gossip, but the Count said that it would depend on how she presented herself. Now, thanks to the decision made by the Count and the Duke, Eleanor was reading an important letter. She understood that she received this offer thanks to her ability to matchmaking, but she was embarrassed by the fact that she was involved in a story with the main character of her next novel. In her novel, the main character, Irene Hastgadr, was unrequitedly in love with Ryan. She thought to leave Ryan indifferent to the feelings of a girl in love with him. In the story, Irene had to come up with a plan after a while, according to which she should pretend that he spent the night with her. Ryan, seeing a girl crying, cannot cope with a sense of great responsibility, makes a marriage proposal unhappy. Eleanor decided to use her plot, deciding that in this case everything should go smoothly, and the wedding would certainly take place. She thought that if she used it and gave advice, then everything would go smoothly, and she would be in the favor. She decided that if she did so, she would receive the most powerful title she had ever had. The girl felt that if she published a book about it, she would be a bestseller, and money and fame awaited her. Eleanor decided that she had to see the hero of her future novel. True, since she decided to live alone, she stays away from men. She was attracted by the opportunity to participate in the plot herself, and she decided on this adventure. The Baroness gave her consent to come to the Duke's residence on a special mission, replying in a letter that it was a great honor for her. If a date was set, she would certainly come and attend an audience with Ryan. Without thinking about further consequences, she sealed the letter and ordered a reply to be sent. And now she is already in the Count's office receiving instructions. According to him, their meeting with the young man must be accidental. Eleanor tries to convince the Count not to worry. The Count is extremely concerned about what will happen as a result. It seemed to him that the girl does not understand where she got involved. But according to the Baroness, she has her own secrets and arguments. In the silence of the coming evening, which covered the residence, the Count escorted the guest to Ryan's private study room. She paid attention to his favorite book and told Count Zeppelin that it already told her a lot about its owner. But she objected that she was very careful about the affairs of her clients. After all, she knew everything about the hero of this novel, and moreover, she knows not only the present, but also his future. To which the Count objected that these were just her guesses. Left alone in the study room, she looked around and decided to read. Eleanor sat comfortably with a book waiting for her visitor. But her thoughts constantly returned to the task that was set for her. She decided that she would do everything in such a way that everyone would decide that it was thanks to her that the goal was achieved. She was torn away from her thoughts by the feeling of someone else in the room, and right in front of her stood a beautifully built young man with platinum hair. He looked at her with beautiful purple eyes, his handsome face expressing surprise. She had no doubt that this young man was Ryan Floyd Calabria. Looking at him, the girl admired his beauty, and he looked at her silently. Suddenly, he quoted a passage from a book she was reading. The girl immediately answered him with the following passage, which she knew by heart. She was delighted that he knew the book History of the Cosmos. In response, he said that he loved this book very much and admired its author. Eleanor thought that this man with his appearance and strength was capable of a lot. Ryan said that his love for the book is due to the fact that the male character in it corresponds to his type. And there are also wonderful words in the book that touched him to the depths of his soul. It says that winning someone's heart is like building a mansion. Eleanor answered him in the words of the book that if he could do it, and she continued the thought, if everything works out, this mansion can be called her home. She asked the interlocutor if he always wants to live in accordance with his expectations. He clarified with which ones. She cautiously continued, clarifying that many ladies expect attention from him, and noticed his dissatisfaction with this phrase. Eleanor tensed, sensing his irritation. Meanwhile, approaching her, Ryan replied that he did not consider it necessary to pay attention to all women. He was only interested in one. The girl was completely confused that he was so close to her. She wondered why he was looking at her like that. The man was getting closer and closer to her, and she was taken aback. She did not expect such a plot twist. Eleanor looked at him and could not believe her eyes. This man sitting next to her was madly exciting. She had absolutely nowhere to move away, and he was staring at her and insanely embarrassed the girl. Bringing his lips close to her ear so that she could feel his breath, he said that she herself had come here. He knows the reason for her presence. Eleanor was terribly worried that they were so close. Meanwhile, Ryan went on to say that he had guessed that his father had sent it. Eleanor stared at him, knowing that clouds were gathering over her, and he looked at her and wondered what she would do. Looking at her, he continued to say that in the beginning, when it came to the book, he had no idea about anything, and Eleanor was frantically thinking what she had done wrong and what to do now. She decided to pull herself together and stretched out her hand, pushing him away. To begin with, the girl asked the man to keep his distance and move away to continue the conversation. When he moved away a little, she began to come to her senses. As she caught her breath, Ryan asked what she wanted to talk about. And at that moment, she wanted to tell him everything directly. But what kept her from talking directly was that she did not know how the princess felt about him. Gathering her courage, she said that he had already guessed the nature of her visit. He noted disappointedly that most likely she had come to persuade him to marry the princess, but immediately noted that he was not going to marry a stranger. Eleanor noticed that it often happens that feelings arise after people start living together. Ryan clarified whether she really thought so. In response, Eleanor said that, of course, she did. To which he replied that as a warrior, everything should be tested in practice. Then Eleanor decided to go ahead. What else could she do? She said if this is so, then he can test it in practice. She was sure of the refusal, but he unexpectedly agreed with her, saying why not try and gain experience. Looking at her, he listened attentively while she argued in favor of living together for the emergence of love. And for some reason, she remembered about a flower growing on a rock, which no one could reach. What a pity. Its inaccessibility is simply depressing, she thought. And she said out loud how good it would be if he had the right pair to test this theory. He looked at her seriously and asked if she thought he already had a couple. Did he already have a partner? Eleanor wondered. Or was he hinting at her, she thought. Eleanor decided to clarify whether it was about her, to which the man replied that it was better to test the theory with the person who put it forward. The girl was anxiously thinking about what she should do. What was the threat of such a development of events, she thought, looking at Ryan. Seeing her doubts, he decided to clarify what was bothering her. She replied that she was afraid of his feelings of falling in love with her and saw Ryan laugh. After calming down a little, he replied that he was a novice in matters of love. The girl thanked him for such frankness, to which the man sitting next to him hinted that she could enlighten him. Because of his hints, the girl felt uncomfortable, but she decided to act anyway. Ryan looked at the girl thoughtfully, wondering how she would get out of this situation. Eleanor decided not to give up and take control of the situation. For her own safety, the girl decided to limit the man's movements. Night had already replaced evening, intending to hide the secret of what was happening in the residence. Ryan's hands were tied, which gave the illusion of his helplessness. A few minutes earlier, Eleanor, leaning close to her interlocutor, tied them up with her silk scarf. But there was one huge problem. She did not understand at all what to do next. Eleanor couldn't help but move closer to Ryan, and he was staring at her. The attraction between Eleanor and Ryan was growing rapidly. She could feel it under his gaze. The man was delightfully handsome and seemed special to Eleanor. Under his gaze, the girl began to worry a lot. She did not understand why this was happening. Looking at him more closely, she realized that she was also worried. Eleanor realized that she needed to protect him, and she figured out how to get rid of the gaze that worried her. With a slight movement, she untied the scarf around the man's neck, and it came as a surprise to him. Then she blindfolded him with a confident movement. Now she won't be able to look at her. Eleanor was satisfied. That exciting look was gone. Ryan was amused by the situation. He decided that he would let her enjoy the power over him. Now Eleanor, without feeling danger, could enjoy the sight of a handsome man. She admired the beauty of his elastic and strong body. His velvety voice asked what she intended to do next. Hearing his voice, she shuddered and became even more embarrassed. She decided to ask him if his expectations were being met. She was madly drawn to him. Eleanor decided to get closer, and Ryan, sensing her approach, reached for her. His lips almost touched Eleanor's neck. She was excited. Ryan released his bound hands. Unexpectedly for the girl, she found herself in his arms, and she pulled the blindfold off her eyes with a slight movement. Eleanor recoiled in confusion, and Ryan said that he was a warrior and that he had no trouble freeing himself from these ropes. The next second, the girl was already lying on the floor, and the man was looming over her, and she felt his strength. He looked down at her and clarified what she was going to do now. Eleanor realized that she was about to suffocate from the excitement that seized her, and she could not understand what awaited her. Ryan asked if she was scared, and Eleanor knew she couldn't stand up to what was happening. She felt completely helpless now. At that moment, there was a knock on the door of the study room, and the servant announced that dinner was ready. Ryan continued to restrain Eleanor and shouted that he forbade the servant to enter, warning in case someone dared, he would lose his life. At that moment, he looked like a madman with eyes darkened either from anger or from passion. This Eleanor, who was watching, could not understand what was happening. The servant outside the door cried out in fear and hurried away. Ryan looked down at Eleanor and said that the door to his room was nearby. She was no longer able to resist. I just thought that everything had gone very far. After Eleanor and Ryan were in the room, what was about to happen happened. Bianca Weiss looked longingly out of the window. Her carriage was inexorably approaching the capital. Soon she would arrive at the Emperor's palace. The beautiful palace of the Emperor was already out of sight. And here she was already in one of the halls of the palace. A beautiful girl who was surrounded by friends called out to her. Hearing her name from her lips, Bianca shuddered. The girl continued to wave her hand affably. The girl approached and took Bianca's hands in hers and greeted her warmly. It was the Princess of the Empire, Irene Haskator. She suggested that the girl go quickly and look at the dresses that were sewn for the celebration of the princess's birthday. The imperial capital, Haskator Felicity, was ready for the princess's birthday celebrations. The entire population, from commoners to nobles, gathered to celebrate this event. Bianca Weiss arrived at the palace to celebrate the event, but it was against her will. The princess hurried Bianca to quickly go after her to look at the dresses. The girl thought that the princess would be the queen of the holiday. She insistently called Bianca to try on dresses. Choosing one of them, Irene showed the girl one of them. The friends chirped in admiration, interrupting each other. The girls admired the dresses presented to them. They were smartly decorated and sewn in the latest fashion. The princess showed her dress to those around her. It was modest and different from the dresses of her friends. The dresses of the girlfriends looked much more chic and were all the same. Bianca thought that the princess was very cunning because all the girls would look alike. The princess did this on purpose so that no one could stand out. She needed to be the only one who stood out against the background of the same crowd. Because the magnificent Ryan should arrive at the holiday, only he is able to make a brilliant part for the princess. Doubting that Ryan would talk to her, he turned to Bianca to clarify what she thought about it. The girl said that everything would be fine. Even if Ryan did not talk to the princess, he would still have to marry her. Hearing the girl's opinion, those around were outraged by her words addressed to the princess. Bianca thought with horror that she would be in trouble because of what she blurted out. The girl hurried away, saying that she needed to powder her nose. And the princess agreed with her friends that Bianca's statements, as always, are inappropriate. When Bianca managed to be alone, she exhaled. She was terribly tired of the princess and her hypocritical friends. 3 years have passed since Irene Hascator confessed her feelings for the young warrior. It came up during a game of truth or dare at a tea party, a modest confession heard by all the girls. Bianca then thought that despite the fact that many people liked the young man, after the modest confession of the princess, no one would be able to look in his direction. But she also liked the beautiful Ryan. But there is a high probability that he will become the future husband of the princess. That's how Irene's confession made the rest of the girls give up the fight. None of the girls will be able to confess their feelings to the famous young man. Bianca shared her thoughts on this with her closest friend. And this was her huge mistake. She thought that Biancasta herself was in love with Ryan, which she told her friends about. Everyone began to condemn Bianca for daring to think such a thing. She was appointed guilty of the betrayal of the princess and gossiped about what happened on every corner. And the girl could not understand how everyone knew about her words. Literally everyone thought that she was blinded by jealousy, so she betrayed her highness. But unexpectedly for Bianca, the princess graciously extended a helping hand to her. She asked everyone to stop blaming the girl. She said Biancasta had made a mistake, but she had no malicious intent. From then on, Bianca felt like she was living in hell, and the princess was praised by everyone for her generosity. Everyone continued to denigrate the girl, glorifying the princess against her background. The princess received her as her own, generously surrounding her with care, whispered around, "She is so kind and beautiful, and this bastard betrayed her." Hearing all this, Bianca decided that it would be better for her to be rejected and went into seclusion. The girl was distracted from sad thoughts by the voice of the maid. She reported on the letter that had arrived. She ordered her to put it aside, and the girl laid it on the table, saying that the letter was from the princess. Bianca did not want to hear anything about the princess. She was depressed. When Bianca left the room, the maid asked how she was feeling today. The maids whispered among themselves how worried the princess was about her. Bianca was annoyed by the princess's insistent attention. She just wanted to live quietly away from everyone. The girl continued to ignore letters, but over time, terrible things began to happen. First, a neighbor's boy's murdered dog was found in her yard. Everyone thought who could have done this and who was to blame for this incident. They began to ask if anyone had been in the garden that night. Neighbors said that there was one person, and they said it was Lady Biancasta. Bianca tried to explain that it wasn't her. She only went out into the garden for a minute because she could not sleep. She swore that she immediately went to her room. But it was too late. She was already blamed for everything, and the misfortunes continued. Her favorite dress was found in the gutter. Someone else's missing necklace ended up in her box. Evil tongues continued to blame the poor girl for everything, and she was sinking into deep despair. In a deep depression, she locked herself in her room and did not communicate with anyone. When she saw another letter, she decided to read it. What could be unusual about him, she thought. Taking the letter in her hands, the girl saw the coat of arms of the princess. After reading the letter, the girl guessed the cause of her misfortunes. This upset her, and she fell helplessly on the bed. The princess wrote that she had heard of her troubles. The terrible guess made the girl weep with renewed vigor. She was in despair. She clearly understood that everything that had happened could not be an accident. Everyone who dared to contradict and go against the will of the princess disappeared forever. All the power and the nobility were on her side. She could not believe it. The girl remembered the warnings of her parents, how her parents warned her not to say too much, otherwise she could lose her head. At first glance, the princess seemed not to be involved in Bianca's misfortunes. The princess was pouring tea in her room as if nothing had happened. They noticed Bianca's arrival and greeted her casually. The girl was silent with a sad look, standing in the middle of the room. The princess noted with regret how difficult it had been for her lately. Bianca remained silent. She was in despair. The princess took her hands and assured her that everything would be all right now. But Bianca must promise that she will never give it away. She looked at the girl so tenderly that she cried, exhausted by misfortunes. In return for her devotion, the princess promised her protection. Bianca could not stand it anymore and agreed to the princess's proposal, realizing that this promise was fatal for her. The girl returned to the court because the princess achieved what she wanted by any means. The princess was preparing for the celebration, the purpose of which was to win the heart of Ryan Calabria. Her desire to possess him would be fulfilled. If anyone dared to fall in love with this man, he would immediately disappear from the face of the earth. Bianca knew about this now. You can't claim what the princess wants. Now the girl was on a short leash. Meanwhile, at Ryan Calabria's house, the young man who had just been dozing felt emptiness. Ryan woke up and sat up on the bed, looking around, and said the girl's name. He thought with regret about her departure. Her hand involuntarily ran over the sheet on which she had recently lain. He was happy this long night. What was happening was like a magical dream. After all, a few years ago she could not have thought that he would have such a chance. 3 years ago he was begged to go to the event, but he refused on the pretext that they were alien to him. And yet, the young man agreed because the host of the event promised to allocate part of his land for a training ground. But once there, he secluded himself in the library. No one looked at him there. In the silence, he heard a sound coming from the garden. Peering into the darkness, she noticed something. Ryan thought maybe there was a stranger lurking in the garden. As a true warrior, he decided to defend himself from strangers. Going out onto the balcony, he saw a beautiful stranger crying. Judging by her clothes and appearance, the girl was noble, Ryan thought, but I looked at the crying girl and wondered why she was hiding from everyone. The young man admired the beauty and intelligent eyes of the girl when she took her hands away from her beautiful face. But why was the beautiful young stranger alone in the garden, the young man thought. After the end of the party, Ryan's friend showed up and complained about the most boring event. Blaine was disappointed. According to him, he was annoyed by the crowd of dudes, which he decided to share with a friend. Then he continued that the crowd of disgusting freaks had mocked the young lady and he felt very sorry for her. Blaine told Ryan that she was a low-grade baroness who had been bullied by the mob, and Ryan couldn't believe that they were bullying a girl. Blaine said that the young beauty was not yet 20, her husband died in prison, and she was forced to attend this reception. He saw how one old man 3 times her elder persuaded the girl to remarry, and the others laughed. In response to Ryan's question about what happened next, the friend replied that she had no choice but to leave as soon as possible. The young man had no doubt that his friend was telling him about a girl crying in the garden. Blaine noticed that his friend was very excited and was trying to find out her name, and in confusion, he reported that it was Eleanor Maris. Ryan thought he really wanted to meet her, but she had just lost her husband. The estate of the beautiful Eleanor is located far from the capital, and he cannot pay attention now. At the moment it will be meanness in relation to the widow. After her move to the capital, Ryan felt that she was even farther away from him. And the poor baroness, having arrived in the capital, became a style icon in social circles. He listened to her speech at which she quoted the great writer. It was then that he remembered the phrase about the infinity of space. And here she is in his study room with his favorite book in her hands. I also asked if he had read this magnificent work. Ryan was so excited to meet Eleanor that he did not give her peace all night. Now he was worried and doubted whether the girl felt anything for him, because he was completely inexperienced. And he realized that they had to meet again. Blaine noticed a change in his friend. He saw that he looked happy. The guy asked if something had happened. Ryan replied that there was some kind of incident. Ryan asked his friend if the receptions were taking place now, to which the friend replied in the affirmative, to which the young man asked to tell about the festivities in detail. The friend was very surprised by such an interest, and was interested in the question of where such attention from his friend came from. Ryan told his friend that he just had to. Blaine had promised to tell him everything in detail, but he thought to himself that if his friend was interested in the tricks, 2 moons would rise soon. In response to his friend's promise, Ryan thanked the young man with a mysterious smile. Blaine thought that there was a reason why his friend was interested in the tricks, and that there was something wrong with it. As Eleanor preened, she thought about what had happened. She was surprised that she had lost control of the bottom of the situation. She began to get terribly angry with herself for what she had done to her protagonist. The girl was very worried about what had happened. She even thought about memory loss. This would be a good way out of the situation. The girl began to reassure herself that she would never see Ryan again, and she could not worry about anything. She began to persuade herself to forget about what had happened and to get her thoughts of Ryan out of her mind. But suddenly she realized that the more she tried not to think about Ryan, the more thoughts about him overwhelmed her. Eleanor was already married to a baron, and her experience of marriage was very sad. And on the other hand, Ryan was the most eligible bachelor in the Empire. She was also very worried about the idea that she had caught someone's eye as she left Ryan's room. The girl was even scared to think about this, and she wanted to make these thoughts go out of her head by an effort of will. She understood the complexity of the situation, but as long as she was silent, she had nothing to worry about. She thought that no one would believe in the possibility of a marriage between a duke who had no relations with women and an unfamiliar lady. She understood that if they believed in this, they would try to bribe her and kick her out in disgrace. Eleanor was also sad that after spending time with Ryan, she would never see him again. She does not regret what happened between her and the Duke, because it was wonderful. She decided to cherish these beautiful moments in her memory, because these memories warmed her heart. The flood of thoughts and memories made the girl burst into loud sobs. Suddenly, another thought came into her mind. She called her by name, but she did not introduce herself. The girl remembered his beautiful, exciting voice and the way he had called her name, Eleanor. She tried to push these thoughts away as quickly as possible, convincing herself that it didn't mean anything. All these floods of memories and doubts tired her very much. Looking out the window at the falling night and the sparkling stars, she thought that a new day would bring her relief. In her mind, she returned to the novel, remembering the first day of the princess's birthday celebration. With sadness, the girl thought that if she followed the plot of the novel, tomorrow the main character would propose to the princess. The girl was short of breath at the thought of how Ryan might not remember her in the morning. She decided to stop being sad and direct her efforts to preparing for the holiday. On the first day of the celebration of the princess's birthday, the petty nobility, not invited to the palace, organized festivals. For these people, participation in the festival was an excellent trench to show themselves and raise their status. In the morning, Eleanor woke up in a disgusting mood, but decided that this was not a reason to refuse the receptions. She understood the need for her presence in the capital at receptions in honor of the holiday. The girl looked at the invitation. She understood that it was necessary to leave for the capital urgently. Otherwise, her mother-in-law would appear and return to the Maris estate would be fatal, and she could not allow that. Everything that she had built with such difficulty cost her too much. The girl resolutely went to the place of the reception. Her present depended on it. Seeing Eleanor at the reception, those around were delighted. Admiring exclamations were heard everywhere. The girl, dressed in the latest fashion, entered the hall. Her beauty was unique, as evidenced by the enthusiastic whispers of those present in the hall. Her mood improved from the admiration of those around her, and she was already thinking about dancing. She took a glass and slowly walked around the hall. At this moment, her thoughts were interrupted by the hum that was growing in the hall. The girl looked around and thought that, judging by the reaction of those around her, someone important had arrived. Due to the sheer number of people, she couldn't see anything. Eleanor noticed how one of the girls present screamed in surprise. She looked at the visitor with great surprise and could not believe her eyes. The girl saw gorgeous platinum hair, which was painfully familiar to her. Her gaze also fell on the sign of the Knights of the Empire. There could be no mistake. Eleanor just couldn't believe what she was seeing, and she was extremely excited. Ryan appeared before the amazed guests of the event, and the girl thought and she was extremely surprised by his appearance here. The Duke of Calabria was terribly angry, enraged by the absence of his son. Shaking from fear of the Duke, the servants reported that his son was not in the residence and no one knew where he was. Crying, the servants reported that Ryan, wearing a ceremonial suit, left the residence. Perhaps he went to the princess. The maid even suggested that Ryan had been kidnapped, but the Duke said that was simply impossible. He could hardly restrain himself, thinking about his son's act on the princess's birthday. He ordered the servants to turn the palace upside down and search every nook and cranny. Father could not believe that this snot could do such a thing. He was haunted by the thought of where Ryan had gone in his new dress suit. Eleanor couldn't believe what she saw either. Her thoughts were confused. She couldn't understand why she wasn't in the palace. Looking at Ryan, she thought in horror why he was here and not in the imperial palace. Suddenly, the young man invited her to dance, which made her feel completely uncomfortable. She felt how those around her began to pay close attention to them. Fortunately, Eleanor managed to find a way out, and citing poor health, she suggested that Ryan take a walk before the dance. Trusting her, the young man followed the girl, and they left the hall. When the young people were alone, Ryan asked why she refused to dance. Eleanor answered the question with a question. She asked with excitement what had brought him here at such an hour. Ryan embarrassedly said that he found out where Eleanor would be, and she, after listening to the answer, asked why she was not at the princess's birthday party. Looking intently at the girl, the young man replied that he found out where exactly she would be and he wanted to see her. Eleanor ventured to voice her guess and asked him bluntly if he knew who she was from the beginning. Ryan smiled mysteriously and asked evasively what she thought about it. The young man did not understand why the girl suddenly began to push him away and shout that he should be in the palace now. Ryan understood the reason for the girl's worries. She was terribly worried about the rumors if everyone found out about them. The girl tried to explain to him what problems awaited them if they found out about them, but did not understand why she cared so much. Eleanor desperately pressed her hands on his chest, trying to pull him away, and he put her arms around her wrists, trying to say it didn't matter. Ryan smiled at her attempts to realign herself and spoke her name. He wanted to convince her that what others said was an empty phrase for him, and she looked at him and thought about the impossibility of what was happening. Suddenly, Ryan said words of love to Eleanor. Yes, he fell in love with her after that night. Hearing his confession, the girl was speechless. She was now thinking about how to make herself worse in his eyes. She found nothing better than to tell Ryan that she didn't like the book that brought them together. Although it was a pure lie, the girl just adored this book, reading it all day long. She came up with another idea and shouted, if he wants to be with her, let him give her a lot of money. The Count was puzzled by her demand, and after clarifying her demands, he thought for a while. And Eleanor calmed down a little, thinking that it would definitely work, and Ryan would turn away from her. Deciding to finally disappoint the Duke, she told about her extravagance and bad habit of flirting with men. And she added that she came on her first visit for money but did not have time to steal anything. Since the Emperor's favorite princess likes this man, she simply will not be allowed to be with him. She had to do everything to make him turn his back on her, otherwise she would inevitably be sent to the scaffold. Finally, Ryan spoke, announcing that he would not give her a penny, and the girl realized that she had succeeded. Eleanor's joy that Ryan was finally coming to his senses was overshadowed by a premonition of separation, because she would never see him anymore. She was even more pleased when the young Duke announced his decision to leave. Ryan said that he would not leave her for a long time and return with money. In amazement, the girl did not immediately understand the meaning of what the young Duke said. The protagonist of her novel, an insanely handsome, educated, and noble man, a mighty warrior, for some reason behaves like a rag. Looking at her, the Count continued to say that there was enough money in the mansion to buy a dress. Ryan continued to talk and promised that if he ran out of money, he would steal it for her. A picture flashed through Eleanor's mind, 500 years later, of a teacher hurrying to a student about what was happening in the Empire at that time. And the student in response tells how the greatest knight of the empire was forced to steal for the sake of excessive spending of his beloved. The girl clutched her head in despair. She thought that she could not allow this. And Ryan continued to say that he was ready to buy her as many beautiful dresses as she wanted. He himself was pleased with it. The Count looked into Eleanor's eyes and added that he was ready for anything. No matter what she said, he was ready for anything. He gently touched her chin, raising his head, and she felt dizzy from the surging emotions. At this time, the attention of the guests of the reception was attracted by the appearance of a group of people. They were the Knights of Calabria who had come to look for the Duke. Ryan listened attentively. What was happening at the reception did not escape the attention of an experienced warrior. A minute later, he picked up the girl in his arms and rushed away from the place of celebration. He carried Eleanor easily through the garden, despite her protests and pleas to return. In response to her protests, he said emphatically that he was not going to return. In a secluded corner of the park, a wagon appeared that had been left there on purpose. Eleanor guessed that the Duke had prepared everything in advance, and she had told him about it, and he calmly agreed with her. Bowing his head to the girl, he apologized for forcing her to leave, but on this day, he wants to be only with her. As Eleanor listened to him, she listened to him and thought about why he had decided to stay with her today. Looking at the girl, the Duke said that today was a special day that would change his life, but he needs to know if she has feelings for him. He wanted to see confirmation that after spending the night with her, his feelings for him had awakened. In response to his question, the girl sighed softly and lowered her gaze. The words stuck in her throat. Ryan hugged the stunned girl and said that this answer would be enough for him. After a while, the fugitives were already sitting in the carriage, following a direction known only to the Duke. To the measured clatter of hooves, Ryan began his story about the reasons for what was happening. When he was 6 years old, his parents brought a famous fortune teller that she had predicted the future. The old woman predicted that when he turned 20 years old on the night of Deneb, when a star appeared, the person with whom he would spend that night would be his fate. The idea occurred to Eleanor that the fortune teller was very skillful. And immediately she was replaced by the next thought that today, according to the plot of the novel, he should be with the princess. Ryan went on to say that even if it was just words, he believed in the prediction. He covered her hand with his own and pronounced her name, and then said that he had one request. Ryan said that he understands, because love does not come overnight. But despite this obstacle, he asks her to spend the night with him. He looked at Eleanor intently, waiting for her to answer. He wanted her to agree. She looked at Ryan intently and thought it was just unbelievable, but she agreed. Finally, the girl decided to ask where they were going. From her question, Ryan realized that she finally agreed to his request. Finally, Ryan and Eleanor were there, and Eleanor had only heard of him from stories. Lafloyd Castle was the most beautiful in the empire and served as a symbol of its prosperity. True to its symbol of wealth, it was not founded by any of the 5 dukes. Eleanor was delighted with the rich decoration of the castle, but she remembered that only members of the Floyd family could visit it. The first room Ryan showed her was a gorgeous bedroom with a huge bed. Eleanor looked at the situation doubtfully. She looked around the large bed and expressed her concern to Ryan. He tried to dispel them, assuring her that he would not do anything she did not want to. She was confident in Ryan, but Eleanor was afraid of falling off herself and decided to keep her distance. Looking at Eleanor's doubts, he added that if she had doubts, she could tie him up. Eleanor accepted his offer, supporting the game. She tied his hands without any doubt. The Count noted her weakness for shackles, noting that he could easily extricate himself. This was only a mark. If it happens that the ribbon is tied differently in the morning, it will mean that the mark is broken. The girl threatened that if this happened, she would never meet him again. Having agreed on the conditions, the young people decided to go to bed. The imperial palace was filled with guests, and there were many famous guests in the hall. Among the guests were Claude Lowen, the new chancellor and head of the Duchy of Lowen, the head of the West. His formidable appearance frightened those present, and Claude was quite satisfied with this. Looking at him, Menage Avroth, who was the diplomatic leader of the Duchy of Avrot and the head of the East, watched Claude. Sitting down at the same table with him, she noted his unsociability, to which he said that it was his duty to be there. He replied to her that if there was a will, but he would not be hurt. The omnipresent Menage knew the reason for his reluctance to attend the event. He hated the Duke of Calabria. Menage told Claude that she knew information about the Duke of Calabria that might interest him. She was about to begin her story when she felt someone else's hand on her shoulder. Arthur Bormio, administrator and head of the Duchy of Bormio, said that he also wants to hear this information. Menage said the Duke of Calabria was furious that his son did not show up for the princess's birthday party. Her interlocutors vied with each other to make assumptions. Because he could not be so busy or forgetful, they tried to understand what this meant. Menage said there was a very good reason for Ryan's absence. He had no doubt about it. She told her interlocutors that she did not have weighty evidence, but she had her feminine instinct. Her interlocutors, knowing about her brilliant intuition, agreed with her. The men who took part in the conversation stopped at the fact that over time everything would be revealed. Meanwhile, the Duke of Calabria was furious at the absence of his son. In the palace, no one could understand what was happening, and the princess was not herself. The courtiers whispered in the corners, making the most unusual assumptions about Ryan's absence. The man admired the sleeping Eleanor, not daring to touch her. He did not sleep all night. The girl sleeping next to him was just beautiful. He was ready to look at her forever. The girl slept peacefully, her wonderful hair scattered on the pillow, her facial features relaxed. Sleeping Eleanor did not suspect that Ryan, who was sitting next to her, was going crazy with the desire to touch her. His hands reached out to touch his hair, but he couldn't break his promise. He suddenly remembered the first time he had met her in the garden, hiding and lonely. In the end, the man could not resist, bending low. He picked up a strand of her hair and kissed her. The walls of the beautiful Lafloyd castle were illuminated by the sun. Ryan removed the shackles from his stiff hands and rubbed his wrists and said that he had not been able to sleep all night. Happy and fresh, Eleanor reported that she had slept well that night. Ryan, who had not slept all night admiring the sleeping girl, thought it was hard not to notice. The girl, who rested during the night, noted that despite the fact that this is someone else's house, she slept well. The young man suffered all night with his hands tied and controlled his strength, doing everything so that the ribbon did not break. Realizing this, the girl looked at him with pity. She did not want to torture him at all by tying her hands. Ryan lightly removed the feather from the pillow that had stuck to her hair. He calmed the girl down, saying that he could free himself even from this paltry price for spending the night with her. Ryan's hand was still next to her face, and she looked at him as if spellbound. When Eleanor regained her awareness of reality, she told the man about going back. The Count asked her to stay a little longer, but she said that it was only a question of one night. In an attempt to keep Theonore before she left, he offered her an official relationship. She was madly attracted to Ryan, but she understood that their official relationship was impossible. If the story involves a princess who shows interest in the Count, there is no place for her. Trying not to look at the Count, she quietly said that if she was dating, it would only hurt both of them. Ryan said in confusion that he was sure that Eleanor had feelings for him, to which the girl replied that it was not about her feelings. She needed to look at the world realistically. The young man asked if that meant they would never see each other. The Count could not believe in their parting, and she tried to explain to him that if she stayed with him, she would lose her status and job. Trying to take his hand from his palm, Eleanor continued to say that the Duke would definitely send soldiers after them to separate them. The girl clearly understood that any hope of continuing their relationship was simply doomed. She was not going to take such a risk. Finally seeing his missing friend, Blaine asked rather sharply about the reason for his absence. To this, Ryan calmly replied that he had warned him that he would take a day off. Blaine realized that his friend had found the lady he was interested in and asked where she was. Upon learning from his friend that she had left alone, Blaine was indignant, but Ryan calmed him down by ordering that he had assigned an escort to her. But Blaine continued to worry about the girl, because Ryan approached her in front of a crowd of people. But the friend, as if not understanding the danger of the situation, said that he did not want to hide their relationship. Then Blaine decided to ask if his friend was going to meet her, but Ryan replied with silence. Blaine understood the danger of the situation, believed that his friend was out of his mind. But Ryan replied that Eleanor was gone. She did not see the future of this relationship. Blaine was glad that the girl had a head on her shoulders, unlike his friend. Ryan recalled how Eleanor was frightened when she saw him at the event and tried to persuade him to go to the Emperor's palace. She told him that their relationship threatened her future and she could not take risks. He had thought too much of himself, putting her at risk. Ryan knew that now. Ryan perked up and was going somewhere. Seeing this, Blaine asked where his friend was going. The friend asked in surprise why bother the Duke at such an hour, especially since his father was looking for him in anger. Ryan decided to go to his father to ask permission to marry Eleanor. Now he realized that the girl was right to fear for her future. The conversation of his beloved resurfaced in his memory. Now he understood why she said that they had no future. The last thing Blaine heard was his words about his friend's decision to marry Eleanor. At this time, in the palace of the great family of Hascator, the head of the Duchy of Pedra, Herodex Robert Pedra, decided to talk about his son's plans for the future. Ego, son of Sky Pedra, listened to his father, who said that his return home would have to be postponed. Sky looked through the book and listened to his father not very attentively, and he said that they had a chance that should not be missed. When asked by his son what kind of chance it was, he told about the rumors that everyone was discussing, about the cancellation of the princess's engagement. Sky did not really understand what chance his father was talking about, but he explained that his son was a future duke, and he was single. But the future duke did not believe that the princess would at least cast her glance at him. The Empire of Light Haskator has its own shadow, its mirror-like dark reflection. The Duchy of Pedra, the exact opposite of the Empire of Light. Hundreds of years ago, Duke Pedra became the first to be granted the title of Archduke by Emperor Haskator. The Duchy of Pedra was held together by the shadow economy, which was full of revelry and merriment, and the Haskator Empire was the center of absolute power. Therefore, Sky was sure that there was a huge gap between him and the princess. After listening to his son, Robert Pedra asked him if he had heard of Ryan Calabria. The young man replied to his father with a smile that it was impossible to find someone who did not know him. But Robert said that he meant something else. Ryan was chosen for marriage by the princess herself. Continuing to flip through the book, Sky noted that if the princess chose Ryan, he was definitely not her type. However, he was not very interested in her either. His type of intelligent, elegant, and passionate woman, in his opinion, a princess brought up at the court, is unlikely to have these qualities. He didn't want a crowd of concubines, he said, so he wanted a man who would suit his tastes. Looking up from his book, Sky looked thoughtfully into the distance, if only he could choose. He dreamed of an intelligent and reasonable woman, and she did not need to howl of a noble family. The father continued to insist that if the princess became his wife, he would be on top of the world, but the son did not support his opinion. Sky objected, because due to his origin, marrying a princess would make him an ordinary emperor's puppy. The father asked if he felt sorry for the princess because Ryan Calabria rejected her, falling in love with a lowly girl. The father added that the imperial palace was full of rumors about his love for the beautiful widow. Sky found it hard to believe these rumors. He did not expect this from Ryan. The young man met Ryan 14 years ago at the imperial school, where he was considered the best student. But with the arrival of Ryan, Sky's confidence in his exceptionalism was shaken. From that moment on, he began to consider Ryan as his rival, especially in the field of swordsmanship. The young duke constantly tried to prove that he was better than the count in everything, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not surpass him, especially in the skill of wielding a sword. Back then, Sky focused on medicine and magic, in which he was superior to Ryan. Sky teased the young man, trying to hurt him by displacing him from the first place in the knowledge of these disciplines. But to his great surprise, Ryan did not pay attention to this, not noticing Sky himself. The young man realized that his opponent was only interested in swords. Constantly watching the Count's training, the Duke concluded that Ryan was a rock man. Knowing his rival, it was impossible to imagine that he would be interested in a woman. Sky was very surprised by Ryan's strong interest in the young widow. Suddenly, a thought came to the young man's mind that inspired him to act, and he called for a servant. When Janet arrived, he ordered some information to be gathered. He ordered the servant to find out as much as possible about the woman with whom the Count of Calabria was in love. And finally, he added that the information should be as detailed as possible. In the ancestral castle of the Calabria family, the conversation between father and son became more and more tense. The Duke was angry at what his son had said. He refused to take his words seriously. Ryan's desire to marry a widow was madness that entailed disastrous consequences. Ryan listened to his father's angry speech, and in his opinion, it was his father who was talking utter nonsense. His father continued to insist that his son's marriage to Eleanor was impossible. But Ryan continued to insist on the seriousness of his decision to marry the Baroness. The Duke asked his son to think about what the Emperor's reaction would be to his marriage to the Baroness. My father was terribly angry with himself that he did not foresee such a deplorable result of his plan. He had always dreamed of his son's marriage to the princess, and he told her about it the day before she was born. The Duke of Calabria convinced Irene that the hope of his son's marriage to her was his only dream. The princess liked the Duke's idea of marrying Irene and the Count, and she even agreed to spend the night with him. "We need to make it happen, then Ryan will be trapped." The Duke asked the princess how she would feel about finding Ryan in her bedroom. The princess pretended to be embarrassed by his proposal, but was not opposed to the duke's plan. Calabria decided to get his son drunk when he was unconscious to the princess's room. If in the morning a young man finds himself in the bed of a princess, he will not be able to refuse to marry her. The duke told his son that his marriage was a matter of political importance, and he could not exchange the princess for a widow. Ryan said that he had nothing to do with Her Imperial Highness. The count objected to his father, calling the talk at court about his marriage with the princess rumors. Ryan said that he would only marry the woman he loved. The duke was upset by his son's lack of understanding. Ryan, in his opinion, did not foresee what consequences would come for the duchy. The count's refusal to ally with the princess would bring great trouble to the duchy, his father believed. Ryan directly told his father that he was forcing him to conclude a political marriage. Looking point-blank at his son, he confirmed the political significance of his marriage to the count's mother. Ryan asked his father if he regretted his decision to marry Duchess Floyd without love. His mother returned to the Duchy of Floyd immediately after the birth of her son and never came to the capital again. Her father considered her destiny fulfilled because his wife brought prosperity to the family and gave birth to an heir. This was the purpose of their marriage. In a dispute with his son, the Duke decided to use the latter argument, saying that the Baroness would be in danger if the Emperor found out about their relationship. He believed that the girl would immediately find herself in the dungeon as soon as the Emperor found out about their affair. Ryan retorted that as the commander of the knights, he had the right to grant amnesty to the girl and the Emperor would not be able to ignore it. But the father objected that the girl could be accused of cheating after the incident because she was of low origin. According to him, because of the Emperor's love for Princess, Ryan can expect big trouble for his unwillingness to marry Irene. The Duke feared the consequences of the Emperor's wrath, and they would inevitably come if his son abandoned the princess. He understood that his son's relationship with the Baroness threatened that the Emperor would declare him a traitor. Ryan then replied that in that case, the Emperor should prepare for a rebellion. Saying goodbye to his father, the Count once again announced his intention to refuse to marry the princess. The Duke did not want to let his son go, calling the guards, ordered to urgently detain him. On the orders of their master, the guards rushed after Ryan, blocking his way, but he had already managed to escape. When he stayed, only the Duke blamed himself for calling the Baroness because he himself was the culprit of this terrible mistake. He realized that the decision to invite Eleanor to dispel his doubts about his son was foolish. The Duke must come up with a way out of this situation. In his opinion, Ryan himself should turn away from it. Since Ryan is only a count, his lands are far away, and the army needs funding. The son needs financial support to support his knighthood. If the funding was cut off, he would have nothing to support his warriors, but this woman would have to stay away. He will make sure that because of rumors, she will be kicked out of the circles of the rich, and she will become an insignificant creature. Ryan will see her miserable situation and begin to look at her, then his fantasies about her will evaporate. The Duke called a servant and ordered that their conversation should not go beyond the walls of the castle. If they found out about it, he would destroy all its inhabitants. From that moment on, family representatives and servants were forbidden by his order to attend events with the participation of the Baroness. Graham's faithful assistant at the sight of the Baroness shouted loudly with joy and clapped her hands. Throwing herself into her arms, the girl told how worried she was about her disappearance. When Eleanor inquired about what had happened in Felicity during her absence, Graham was happy to tell the gossip about her and the Count. At court, after the incident, everyone felt sorry for and supported the princess. The Duke of Calabria, in a terrible rage, promised to sever relations with the houses that would support the Baroness, Graham continued. Eleanor had expected this to happen, so she decided to retire to her castle and start writing again. The Baroness's decision to seclude herself surprised Graham, and she said that she should not stop visiting. According to her, only this morning stacks of invitations to events formed on the table. Eleanor was surprised to see the sheer number of invitations, and Graham said that apparently few people cared about the Duke's words. At first, everyone was a little hesitant, but as soon as one invitation came, it was followed by more and more. The fact that the Duke was a noble nobleman mattered, but everyone could not be turned against it, given that people were very curious. Giving another invitation to Baroness Graham, she continued to say that everyone wanted to know about her story with the Count. Eleanor was pleased to notice that even the Marquise Littrell had sent an invitation. The Baroness decided not to refuse visits in the current situation. It would play into her hands. Eleanor will be proactive, and she herself will tell about the breakup of relations with the Count, protecting herself. Graham was happy that the Baroness had found a way out of this difficult situation. The Baroness ordered her assistant to send a letter to the publishing house with the assurance of double payment for large editions of her book. Now that she had rejected the Count, there was no one to protect her, she knew it. The girl decided to turn what happened to her advantage and take advantage of the situation. Eleanor will return to her activities, will no longer associate with men. In the imperial garden, the princess was furiously cutting off the buds from the rose bushes. The humiliation she had experienced infuriated Irene, as evidenced by the dozens of cut rose buds lying at her feet. She was haunted by the thought of a woman who had attempted to kill her fiancé and ruined her holiday. The courtiers were constantly chatting about some Eleanor, admiring her beauty and elegance. The princess was infuriated by the thought of Ryan's intimacy with the Baroness. She could not allow this woman to do as she pleased. Holding the cut bud in her hands, she already understood how she could take revenge on the obstinate Eleanor. The princess called the servants and asked about the arrival of Mrs. Bianchi. The servant confirmed that Mrs. Weiss was already there, and she ordered her to be informed of her visit. The princess has a plan to take revenge on the Baroness with the help of Biancasta. Adrian Eunice called out to Bianca, who was sadly going about her business, when the girl greeted him, and he told her that he had arrived on behalf of his father. According to him, the purpose of the visit was to attend tomorrow's banquet. The young man was not going to stay in the palace for long, and Bianca was very upset about this. Eunice noticed how the girl sighed regretfully and lowered her head. The young man hastened to console her and said that he would be back soon. He shared with Bianca his plans to join the country's armed forces. Eunice said goodbye to the girl, leaving her alone with sad thoughts. Biancasta met the young man at a banquet and was grateful to notice his good attitude. He was the only one who did not look at her with contempt and was happy to talk. Eunice liked Biancasta very much. He came from the countryside and had not yet had time to hear about what had happened to her. The girl was already dreaming of how she would go with Adrian inland and leave this terrible place. Without deigning to look at Biancasta, the princess asked her how everything went. Without looking up, the girl timidly replied that she had succeeded. The princess clapped her hands with joy when she heard a positive answer. Biancasta handed the princess a box containing a vial of the deadly poison Piranatarium. But the princess did not accept the box from the girl's hands and pretended to be surprised when she tried to give it to her. She replied that only Biancasta needed this poison for her personal purposes. The princess feigned horror and made huge eyes and said that she could never have done such an evil deed. Biancasta, not understanding anything, was going to return this terrible box. But at that moment, the princess stopped her with a sharp movement and offered to talk a little. The girl shuddered in pain as Irene grabbed her hand, and a brand burned in the place where her hand was. The princess held the girl tightly and forced her to agree to help her. Wringing her hands, the princess spoke of the need to punish the treacherous woman for her mistakes. Biancasta thought that by the treacherous lady the princess meant Eleanor, and now she would switch to her. Her Highness said that she had a fantasy that it would be a good idea for the Baroness to mix poison into her drink as a punishment. She wishes that someone would do it for her, showing his devotion, and in the meantime, she will be in another place. The girl understood that the princess did not mean an innocent prank. It was about a real murder that Bianca had to do with her own hands. The girl was horrified and refused to carry out the order of her tormentor. With a sigh of disappointment, the princess pretended to leave, but suddenly stopped, and then she said that she knew about Bianca's new friend. The frightened girl tried to convince the princess that she was her only friend, but the princess reminded her of a guy who had come from far away and asked if he was her friend. The princess ordered that Bianca should be devoted only to her. If she made a closer friend, she would be very upset. And of course, she will want this person to immediately disappear from her life. Her Majesty once again asked Biancasta if it was true that she would always remain her best friend. Bianca can prove her devotion to her and use the bottle she brought, the princess mercilessly informed. Having obtained the girl's consent, the princess thanked her and made her promise to keep everything secret. When she was left, one girl was terrified to think what to do now, because she now had the brand of silence on her hand put by the princess. The mark of silence was a symbol of an agreement between two people to keep a secret, so those who have it will never be able to reveal it. Biancasta wept from helplessness, grieving that she had no one to ask for help. The girl understood that if she did not do as Princess Andrian had ordered, she would die. She could have shed tears all over the world, but she had to deal with it herself, Bianca decided. She promised herself to do everything she could to keep Andrian from dying. Arriving at the Count's residence, the knight asked Blaine to invite the Count. Ryan immediately appeared in the room and asked what urgent business he wanted to talk about. The newcomer briefly reported that by order of the Duke of Calabria, all knights must leave the training grounds. Blaine wondered how he could throw out an entire knighthood associated with his land. But Ryan objected, saying that once he inherited knighthood, it would have nothing to do with the Duchy of Calabria. The young earl decided to go to Floyd to his mother for help, despite the fact that his knighthood belongs to another family. Ryan understood that they had no other choice. They needed to stay in the capital. He told the knights to continue training until he informed them of their new location. Blaine saw that Ryan was starting to pack up and wondered where he was going. Seeing Ryan's determination to go on the road, he asked to take him with him, but his friend refused, citing a long journey. Ryan said it would be late, and ignoring his friend's objections, he closed the door behind him. Blaine guessed that his friend had refused to take him with him for a reason. Most likely he had gone to the widow. The young man understood that this was not his business, but the relationship between a friend and the Baroness was extremely dangerous. So when Blaine saw the envelope inviting him to the Marquise Littrell's party, he decided to go to the party. Already sitting in the carriage, the young man decided that if Ryan was not there, he would see the Baroness. He wanted to talk to her to convince her to end their relationship with Ryan for good. Sky Pedra sent a servant to keep an eye on Eleanor to see if the Baroness's meetings with Ryan were continuing. The servant reported that their relationship had come to an end after all this confusion. He saw two escorts beside the Baroness, one resembling her guard and the other an Assanite. After thinking about it, Sky decided that the guard was clearly appointed by Ryan and the assassin was not looking after him on Calabria's orders. He ordered the servant to continue to spy on the Baroness and not to be seen by her guards, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. Those present at the meeting vied with each other to compliment the charming Baroness. In addition to Eleanor's beauty, the guests especially noted her elegant dress. She, as always, was beautifully dressed. At the event, the idea that you should not cling to a person after one night spent together, which was voiced by the Baroness, was vigorously discussed. Blaine, who was in the circle of guests, was watching Eleanor intently, listening attentively to what the others were saying. Some of those present remarked that the Count no longer remembered the name Eleanor, but the young man knew how wrong they were. And the girl enthusiastically continued to talk about the fact that one-night stands are easy to forget. Her rival maliciously remarked that this adventure is as easy to forget as her book. Eleanor ignored the spiteful remark and announced a surprise in honor of the greatest anniversary in Felicity. The surprise was the magnificent champagne from the Duchy of Pedra and the Claw Orchestra she invited. Blaine, who was watching what was happening, decided that such gifts indicated serious connections of the Baroness. At last, the young man found the Baroness alone, standing at the entrance to the terrace and looking out of the window. It was a chance to talk to her. The Viscount decided to start the conversation with the main thing, asking why Ryan hadn't told her about his sincere feelings. The girl knew who was in front of her. It was Viscount Blaine Canterbury. He was Ryan's only friend. From the conversation with the Baroness, Blaine realized that the girl had rejected Ryan and wanted to spread this information as quickly as possible. From what he heard, the Viscount understood that by telling about her separation from the Count, she wanted to save his friend. In the midst of the event, a new guest appeared, and the young people interrupted the conversation with curiosity, looking at the arrival. Blaine and Eleanor turned their attention to the unusual young man who was heading towards them. The Duke of Sky Pedra has long dreamed of this meeting. He finally saw the heroine of the rumors. He gallantly introduced himself to the Baroness, and she noted his unusual accent. Blaine decided to say goodbye to the Baroness, noting that it was an honor to meet her. Kissing the Baroness's hand, Sky looked at her with a respectful smile. Looking at the Duke, Eleanor noticed that his eyes were not smiling, and she thought that he looked like a prince of hell, and danger emanated from him. The Baroness wanted to leave, but Duke Pedra invited her to take a walk and talk in the fresh air. Eleanor decided to listen to him, and he asked about her relationship with Ryan. Skye was not completely sure if it was true. To a defiant question, Eleanor replied that people are unlikely to discuss lies so actively. Duke Pedra asked the Baroness to tell him more about this story. It was very interesting for him to communicate with her. The girl found the Duke's proposal dangerous. She could not ignore it, but she did not want to continue this meeting either. The Baroness had already opened her mouth to reject his offer, but a woman's voice called out to her. A girl stood modestly on the threshold, and in her hands she had a tray with a drink. The Baroness looked at the stranger with interest and asked her to introduce herself. She was interested in who this girl was. Very embarrassed, the stranger said that she had been her fan for a very long time. Eleanor looked at the girl, who asked her permission to offer her a glass of drink. The Baroness decided to take this chance and avoid communicating with Skye. The girls retired to the terrace, and the Baroness took a glass of drink from her hands. Eleanor raised the glass to her lips with pleasure and took a small sip with pleasure. But the girl began to behave strangely. She coughed, as if trying to prevent Eleanor from finishing her drink. When the Baroness asked if she was okay, the girl looked at her silently with tears in her eyes. The Baroness and her fan returned to the hall, which attracted the attention of others, who began to mock the girl. Noticing the attitude of others towards her admirer, Eleanor tried to stop ridiculing the poor thing. The Baroness could not understand the reason for the attacks on the poor girl and listened to what those around her were saying. From the fragments of phrases that were heard from the hall, Eleanor made it clear that her new acquaintance was Lady Weiss. Now the Baroness remembered that it was the infamous Biancasta Weiss, whose reputation had been irretrievably ruined. In the original book, Biancasta Weiss was a villain who was executed for defaming the royal family. The Baroness could not believe that such a young girl was as evil as they said she was. Meanwhile, the Baroness noticed the tear-filled look of Lady Weiss as she handed her the drink. Eleanor had a strange feeling that she shouldn't have finished the drink. On his return from the terrace, Duke Pedra found the Baroness again and inquired about her plans for the evening. He said he was looking forward to an answer, and Eleanor hesitated, not knowing how to answer. At this moment, the girl's eyes became blurred and the interlocutor's face began to blur. She felt very dizzy, staggered, and involuntarily grabbed hold of the Duke. Eleanor felt unwell. She turned very pale and began to cough violently. When the cough stopped, she was horrified to see the blood on her palm, which she used to cover her mouth. Stroking the girl carefully, Skye asked if she had had a drink. Eleanor replied that she drank only one sip from the glass offered to her. Skye suggested that she had been poisoned, and Eleanor was trying to figure out who could have done it. The Baroness remembered her long-time fan Bianca, who served her a glass of poisoned drink, and Eleanor realized that it was this girl who poisoned her drink and served it, pretending to be a fan. The wide-open door was evidence of the girl's escape. She was no longer at the event. Skye was rapidly weakening in her arms. Eleanor almost lost consciousness, but the thought of Bianca's act did not give her peace. Looking at Baroness Skye, I realized that she was getting worse and needed help. Picking up Eleanor in his arms, the Duke apologized to Lady Littrell for leaving early, citing the fact that the girl had drunk too much. The hostess of the event, Lady Littrell, wanted to have the room prepared for the Baroness. But Skye asked her not to worry. With his knowledge and skill as an herbalist and sorcerer, he was the best campaign for Eleanor right now. Blaine, seeing what was happening, could not have seen the Baroness leave the event with the Duke. The fact that the Baroness left with another man startled Blaine, and he decided to tell Ryan about it. Rushing to Ryan's residence, Blaine urgently asked the butler to call him, but the butler informed him that the Count had not yet returned. But Blaine did not believe him, continued to insist on the Count, shouting at the entire palace. At his shouts, the knight assigned by the Count to watch over the Baroness came out, and Blaine asked him if he had reported what had happened. The young man shouted that Ryan should know about what happened at the banquet. He could not propose to a woman who left with another man. In response to Blaine's insistence, the knight named the Count's place of residence. He was in Rosewood Park. Ryan was indeed in the auction house of Palasanodra Park. Rosewood Park is an imperial auction house where you could buy and sell anything. At the auction, everything that was taken away from criminals and debtors could be purchased at affordable prices. Upon receiving an invitation to attend, the Count auction immediately set off. He needed to be there. Blaine felt that if Ryan was far away, he needed to help his friend and take the Baroness himself, because tomorrow was the last day of the holiday. Seeing the Count at the auction, Blaine breathed a sigh of relief and went to his friend's place. Ryan spotted Blaine in the auction room and told him to sit down and be quiet. Worried, Blaine urgently wanted to tell about what he saw at the banquet, but his friend stopped him when the licitator announced the next lot. It was the island of Shankaure. Despite its good location and beautiful architecture, it was not bought because of the exorbitant price. Without hesitation, the Count bet on this lot and his bid was accepted. Already in the carriage, Blade could not believe that his friend had bought the plot and the castle. But he anxiously asked his friend where he would get the money from, because the Duke would not give his son a penny after his trick. The Earl replied that there was still a source of money. He was the only heir to Duke Floyd. Ryan knew that a mansion on the island would cost a lot of money, and the main thing now was to get it. Now Ryan was ready to listen to his friend, and he told him about his visit to the mansion of the Marquise Littrell. Blaine said that he met a girl there that Ryan liked so much. The young man saw how she was received as a high-born person, told about her relationship with the Count, and she made money on it. Then, plucking up the courage, Blaine told his friend that the Baroness had secluded herself with the Duke of Pedra. Ryan reacted instantly, holding Blaine's throat in an iron grip. He menacingly asked which of the dukes he meant. In response to his question, he heard the name of the Duke of Sky Pedra, with whom he studied at the same academy. Ryan thought for a moment, wondering why she had left with him, whether they had known each other before. The Count listened to his friend's words that the Duke wanted to invite the Baroness for the night. Eleanor strangely ended up in Sky's arms. He said that the girl had drunk too much, but it seemed strange to him. Blaine went on to say that it was quite obvious how a man and a woman would behave, so Ryan had to give up on this woman. After listening to his friend, Ryan jumped on his horse. He wanted to talk to Eleanor himself, despite his friend's objections. Blaine, trying to keep his friend, said that the Duke would not allow them to meet, but Ryan replied that even if what happened was true and the Baroness left with the Duke, he could not allow her to be with him. The Count was determined to meet with the Baroness and discuss everything in person. In this situation, Blaine considered the meeting between Ryan and Eleanor extremely dangerous. To avoid a bloody conflict, he asked him to think about what rights his friend was going to demand a meeting, because Ryan was no one to her. Listening to his friend's words, Ryan stopped, and Blaine asked him to think about how the girl would react when she saw him. He tried to convince the Count that there was a risk that his act would cause her feelings for him to fade. After listening to his friend, Ryan said that he had to see for himself everything and talk to the Baroness. Ignoring his friend's calls, Ryan jumped on his horse and set off. Waking up in an unfamiliar place, Eleanor tried to understand where she was and remember the previous evening. The girl was sure that she had been to a party at Littrell's mansion yesterday. She turned around to hear a voice asking if she had slept well and saw the Duke in front of her with a naked torso. Eleanor looked at Sky intently. She was sure she had left the terrace when she met him. The Baroness noticed how strangely he looked at her and wondered what could have happened. Eleanor was sure that even though they were in the same bed, there was nothing between them. If something happened, she wouldn't forget about it. The girl directly told Sky about this. In response, the Duke smiled and said that she was a smart woman. The young man decided to turn the conversation to another topic, asking if she knew about pyranetherium poison. The Baroness was surprised to note that she had never heard of such a thing. Sky said that the poison is made from pyraneth wildflowers. There is no antidote to it. If you take a large dose, you will bleed to death. The Duke knows that this is a rare and expensive poison. It takes a lot of money to get it. The Baroness realized that the Duke had helped her and saved her, and she thanked him for saving her. The Duke said that the Baroness had taken a small dose of poison, so she had survived, and he had no merit in it, although he would have wanted to. He said that although the dose of poison was small, she vomited fragrant blood all night. Sky did not sleep all night courting the Baroness, doing everything to ease her suffering. Lifting her head and sniffing, he said that her lips still smelled of poison. The Duke looked into her eyes and continued to say that despite this, he wanted their lips to meet. Eleanor thanked him again for saving her, but the girl did not understand why he decided to help her. To this, the Duke replied that he liked her and therefore he decided to save her. Eleanor expressed doubts that a high-ranking nobleman would suddenly begin to show signs of attention to her. The Duke inquired as to the reason why the Baroness had rejected the Earl, but the Baroness objected, saying that she had not rejected him. Suddenly, Eleanor remembered Bianca's stay. She wondered what was happening to the girl who had given her poison. Sky offered to send people from the court after the criminal, but the Baroness asked him not to do so until she dispelled her doubts. In addition, Eleanor believed that she had a lot to deal with, and first of all, with the Marquise Litrael. But the Duke stopped her. He showed the Baroness her reflection in the mirror and told her to think first of all about rest. The Duke said that when her reflection in the mirror acquired a healthy pitchfork, he would listen to the Baroness. The Baroness agreed with him, but asked to bring Miss Graham here. She feared that she was in danger because of her. He promised to bring the girl to his residence and advised her to focus on recovery. When she recovers, the Duke will take payment from her for his kindness because he has already dreamed of it. Presently, there was a knock at the door, and Janet's servant asked the Duke to listen to him. The servant reported that the Emperor ordered him to attend the meeting this weekend. Sky wondered what the Emperor wanted to do, though he had one hunch. He believed that the reason for his presence in the palace would be the announcement of Ryan Calabria's engagement to the imperial princess. Sky ordered a messenger to be sent home and warned that he would be late, and Janet clarified how much the Duke was interested in his guest. Sky said that at first he wanted to keep her to annoy Ryan, but now he is interested in her in a different way. In his opinion, the Baroness was intelligent, unpredictable, and at the same time calculating. The Duke found her magnificent. When Janet asked if she should be detained if she wished to leave, the Duke ordered her to be released. Duke Pedro wondered what the Baroness would do when she was alone. Thoughts of Eleanor haunted him, for she had overcome death last night, and this morning she was collected and calm. He thought it magnificent. Janet reminded the Duke that the attempt to poison the Baroness might be repeated and that the Earl might come soon. With a sly smile, Sky told the servant to greet the Count, or his envoy, as kindly and affably as possible. The Duke was eager to see the expression on his old rival's face. A maid came into Bianca's room with a report and found that the girl had not slept. She was crying quietly in the corner. She reported that Her Imperial Highness had come to visit her. The princess went into the unfortunate girl's room and immediately scolded her for her appearance. She pulled back the blackout curtains, letting the sunlight in, and asked how long Bianca would disappoint her. But the only thing the girl could say was to ask if the Baroness was dead, to which the princess replied that the Baroness was not only alive, but also spent the night with Duke Pedro and summoned her maid to his residence. Hearing this news, Bincasta breathed a sigh of relief, and it did not escape the princess's attention. The princess looked at the girl angrily and said menacingly that, in her opinion, Biancasta was glad that the Baroness was alive. The girl tried to justify herself, saying that if the Baroness stayed with Duke Pedro, Ryan would now be with the princess. But the princess objected, scaring Bianca that the surviving Baroness would accuse her of poisoning. If the Baroness and Duke were to unite, they might give the matter unwanted publicity. Her Highness continued, if the Baroness found evidence, she would declare Bianca a murderer, and she would end her days in prison. According to the princess, because of what happened, the Baroness will be more attentive to her surroundings. While the princess continued to humiliate the girl, and she thought that she had become a criminal on the orders of the princess, and the princess continued to say that now Bianca was in a terrible situation and sympathized with her. Continuing to destroy the girl, Irene said that if she were in such a deplorable situation, she would prefer to die. Bianca agreed with her and assumed that if she died, it would all be over. She didn't want to do bad things anymore. But the princess threatened Bianca's stay, in the event of her death, to immediately harm Adrian. Unable to withstand the threats and bullying, Bianca began to beg the princess not to harm anyone. The girl said that she was ready to die if only it would all end. In response, The princess dismissively threw offensive words that she behaved too eccentrically, which caused the hatred of others. After the princess left, the girl tried to understand what to do now in this situation. If death could be the solution, she would have taken this step, but the girl was afraid for her friend. Biancasta could not understand how to find a way out of the situation and save her friend. Not finding a solution, the girl was completely upset and cried bitterly. Count Zeppelin appeared on the orders of the emperor and, bowing in greeting, prepared to listen. The Emperor of Hascator, Klaus Hascator, told the Count that the Duke of Calabria had visited him with a large number of complaints concerning him. The Emperor was indignant at the failure to carry out the order, for which the Count made a deep apology. He asked the Earl if he knew why he had allowed the marriage between the duchies of Floyd and Calabria. In Hascator, by decree of the Emperor, marriages between duchies were prohibited. The Emperor was sure that the Count knew the reason, but decided to remind him why he had to go to these marks. The law was necessary to govern a vast empire so that powerful duchies would not unite against the Emperor. Now, the Duke of Calabria is the most loyal to the imperial family, but his position worsened as soon as he became the head of the family. Count Zeppelin knew that the Duchy of Calabria had been in decline for the past 20 years. This happened because the Duke could not get into the imperial cavalry detachment, but the Emperor planned to use it in his own way in order to weaken the power of the duchies. The Duke of Calabria, having married a representative of the Floyd family, had to give birth to the only heir. The boy born in this marriage was to be handed over to the Emperor for adoption. Count Zeppelin could not believe that Calabria had taken such a step and asked the Emperor if it was true. The Emperor confirmed that the boy was to assume both titles and become his adopted son, subsequently inheriting the throne. The Emperor said that he had no hope of having children of his own, and the boy was to become the most powerful heir in history. But with the appearance of the Emperor's own illegitimate daughter, the plan did not come to fruition. A woman who had a short-term relationship with the Emperor gave birth to a daughter from him. At first, the Emperor refused to marry this woman and accept the baby. But when he saw a beautiful newborn girl, he changed his plans, and the meeting with his daughter changed him forever. The Emperor decided to make his daughter Empress and marry her to Ryan. Now the Earl understood why the Emperor wanted to force Ryan to marry Irene instead of adopting him. After listening to the Emperor, the Count said that in the current situation, this plan was not suitable and would have to be changed. The Emperor replied that he had a backup plan and it was quite traditional. Count Zeppelin understood what the Emperor was talking about. It was a vow. The Emperor was asked why this thought surprised the Count, who replied that it was unusual but that it could be a release. Count Zeppelin remarked that Ryan was very proud and would not take a vow of his own free will. Most likely, he will hate Irene and live like an empty, heartless shell, Zeppelin continued. The Emperor replied that that was why he would give Ryan a choice. He would entrust him with a dangerous mission. According to the Emperor's idea, Ryan will choose himself. He will either complete a dangerous task or marry Irene. The Count objected, saying that Leon was not one to abandon his principles because of danger. In response, the Emperor said that from a conversation with Irene, he learned about a person who could change his mind. He was talking about the wife of the Duke of Calabria and the head of the Floyd family, who had the largest fortune. Duchess Christy Floyd is currently the head of the strongest knights in the empire. A servant who found the Duchess hunting with his pet brought news from the capital, which greatly surprised her. The Duchess carefully read the letter, which contained an invitation to the capital, where an important meeting was to take place. The meeting was connected with rumors about Ryan and his romantic adventures, which spread throughout the capital. The Duchess thought for a moment. She knew that such a commotion could not be related to Irene alone, and she voiced her thoughts aloud. To this, the servant said that he knew who had caused the rumors that were agitating the capital. This is a lady named Eleanor, a low-grade baroness, the cause of the dangerous situation. It can be said that she is a one-night stand and uses scandals to make money, but the princess is worried. Recently, she received a letter from Ryan. He wanted to discuss something with her. This was another argument to go to the capital. The Duchess thought that a problem was brewing, and it was necessary to solve it personally. Upon learning of the assassination attempt on her mistress, Graham shouted that Lady Weiss was truly terrible. Talking to her assistant Eleanor, she tried to understand why Bianca did this to her, because the unfortunate woman had no reason to be offended. To this, Eleanor thoughtfully thought that it was hardly just envy or resentment. Eleanor believed that she was most likely sent to poison her, and perhaps she was forced to do so. The girl continued her thought, suggesting that a spell had been cast on Baroness Weiss. The spell had to be fixed on both sides, but as far as the Baroness knew, it had long been forbidden by law. Grem, thoughtfully, said that it really looked like a spell and suggested that I turn to my aunt, who was a magician. Turning to the magician, the girls learned about the silent oath. If this oath is given, the guarantor will not be able to tell who the spellcaster is. If the one on whom the spell is cast wants to tell, they will only utter a set of strange sounds. After the mage's words, Eleanor remembered how Lady Weiss could not utter a word, but made inarticulate sounds. The use of such a spell entailed severe punishment, and when it was used, it caused hallucinations in patients. Grem had a very important thought. She remembered that spells leave a mark. Eleanor then asked about ways to track whether the spell had been used and where the trail was coming from. The magician said that you can use a stone thread by touching the skin of the enchanted one, and it will show a trace to the spellcaster. Eleanor wanted to know who was behind Lady Vase, and she had given the commission to the Grems. The Baroness asked her assistant to retrieve the stone thread and use it to track the spellcaster. To do this, the girl decided to check Lady Weiss first. Blaine arrived at the residence of Duke Pedra to meet with the Baroness. He told the butler who met him. He was asked to wait for a while, and while waiting he wondered if it was worth doing what she had come here for. The young man recalled his conversation with a friend when he dissuaded him from relations with the Baroness. He voiced to Ryan thousands of reasons why they could not be together, and their marriage was impossible. Eleanor easily accepted the Duke of Pedra's advances and remained with him, for which the Earl's vain attempts to keep the Baroness were urged by Count Blaine. Looking at his friend, the Viscount thought that these words would have an effect on him, and now he would part with the Baroness. And the Count asked him for a last favor, to give the letter to Baroness Eleanor. When Blaine saw Duke Pedra, he hoped that he would spare him and not stab him instantly. But the Duke greeted him kindly, saying that he was glad to meet the Viscount. Hearing from the Duke that the Baroness would not be able to receive him because she was not feeling well, he handed her a letter. The Duke asked if the Viscount was the author of the letter, but Blaine said that the letter was not from him. The young man was very worried that the Duke would want to open the letter, and he replied that he was interested in the contents of the message. Blaine replied that Ryan had urged that the letter should be handed over to the Baroness in person, and that she would deal with its contents as she saw fit. Sky Pedra assured him that he would definitely give the letter to the Baroness personally and asked if he wanted anything else. Brian ventured to ask if the Duke had feelings for Madame Baroness. Duke Pedra replied, admiring Eleanor and considering her an unusual and mysterious person. He remembered how he had courted her all night, but when he was next to her in bed, he was tied up. In the library, the Baroness looked through many books before finding the right one that would tell her about spells. From the contents of the book, Eleanor realized that she could only trust stones, or rather, stone thread. The girl had paid a fortune for the stone thread, but she had not yet had the opportunity to use it. She couldn't get close to Biancasta. It seemed that she had locked herself in her castle and wouldn't come out. Eleanor decided to visit herself. She feared that if she went like this, she would not meet her at the event. The Baroness wanted to know as soon as possible why the girl decided to poison her. The most suspicious is Sky Pedra. He, with his knowledge, could well make poison and persuade the girl. The Baroness decided that she needed a way to check everything around the Duke. She was distracted from her thoughts by an unfamiliar voice, which said that she gave the impression of a very busy person. The man who appeared wanted to know if she was the woman with whom the Count of Calabria had fallen in love. He introduced himself as the real owner of the estate where the girl was staying, and his face was familiar to her. It was Hertzog Rovere Pedra. He was the owner of the Duchy of Pedra. The Baroness apologized for not recognizing the Duke, and he said that he was interested in seeing the girl his son had brought. The Grand Duke said that he would not let her go just like that, and the Baroness asked what she had said or done wrong. The Duke of Rovere replied that his son could not last half a day in a relationship, and he was surprised by her presence at the residence lasted several days. He said that he would not allow the Baroness to leave quickly. The Duke said that his son only considers a girl with outstanding appearance and intelligence, and it is very difficult to find such a girl. He continued his revelations that he sees her as a candidate for the mother of his grandson, if his son is so interested in her. The Duke asked Eleanor to stay at the estate until she and her son returned from the meeting of the dukes from the capital. The Emperor decided to hold the meeting of the dukes in person because of its special importance. Representatives of all the duchies were invited to the meeting at the imperial palace. His lordship continued to persuade Eleanor to comply with his request, despite her objections. Sakai appeared in the library. Putting his hand on the Baroness's shoulder, he asked what was the reason for the commotion and loud conversation. The young Duke continued the questions about which his father had talked so enthusiastically with the Baroness. But the father hurried away without answering the question, referring to the need to attend the banquet. After his father left, the young Duke informed Eleanor that he had a gift for her. He handed the letter to the Baroness, saying that her prince had asked her to hand it to her personally. When she opened the letter, she found a note that asked for a meeting. In the envelope, Eleanor found the key to a building not far from the Chenkature Hotel. Ryan wrote to the Baroness that he would not be there without her invitation, as the decision was hers. Duke Pedra inquired about the health of the Baroness. She replied that she was already better. Having finished the subject of the letters, the Duke wondered if the Baroness would like to visit his bedroom, because perhaps tomorrow he would be killed by the Count. The Baroness's answer amused Skye, who said that if the Count killed him, she would certainly spend the night in the same room as his corpse. The Duke wondered how Eleanor felt about him and how much she liked him. To this, the Baroness replied that her mother taught not to trust men who get too close when courting, and Skye thought about how much this principle worked when Eleanor met with the Count. When the Baroness had retired, pleading fatigue, he stroked her and thought that she was an unusual woman. Remembering the image of Eleanor clutching a letter in her hands, he thought that her eccentricity was very attractive. The inhabitants of the Great Rose Palace were gossiping about Duke Pedra's strange act. The courtiers called the Baroness easily accessible, and one of the girls said that her mother forbade her to read the Baroness's books. Seeing the woman enter, the princess greeted her happily. Duchess Floyd entered the room with a resolute step. She was in the mood for a conversation. The princess informed the Duchess that she was glad to see her, and the Duchess assured her that she had come to her before the Emperor. A messenger appeared and interrupted their conversation, saying that it was time for the Duchess to leave. At parting, the Duchess said that something very important should be decided today. She warmly assured the princess that everything would be all right and she should be calm. The Duchess departed, and the servant said that the Duke of Calabria would soon arrive. So, the princess thought, what Duchess Floyd had told her was true. The dukes who arrived at the meeting greeted each other when Duke Bromia appeared among them. He reported that the Duke of Calabria had been very irritable and had treated Sir Geoffrey rudely. Those who came noticed that Ryan was also with him, but he looked detached, but as always, he was beautiful. Those who had gathered for the meeting discussed how much love the princess had for the Count. The dukes vied with each other to talk about Ryan's incredible act, and in the end, Count Zeppelin offered to stop this conversation. Duchess Minaj noted that she did not see anything wrong with the fact that the union of the princess and the Count would not take place. Duke Lauren said that it was not worth discussing it here. Then Duchess Minaj noted that it was not worth meeting on this occasion either. The speakers stopped their conversation and turned in the direction of the person who entered. Duchess Floyd, who had just spoken with the princess, appeared among those present. Minaj suggested that if the Duchess was here, then the engagement would be announced today. According to the assembled dukes, perhaps the princess had already made a decisive proposal to the Count. Duchess Minaj noted with regret that she had hoped for a different outcome. The audience looked attentively at the Emperor and listened to the announcement of the topic of the meeting. Unexpectedly for everyone, at the behest of the Emperor, it was announced that the topic of the meeting was the enslavement of Hamelia. Hamelia is a rare and dangerous monster that lives in the south of the Empire. A huge and dangerous beast with sharp claws and strong scales covering its entire body. As long as the monster did not need to attack people, it was offered a sufficient amount of cattle and gold. According to Duke Lauren, the monster was paid an adequate price so as not to attack the inhabitants of the surrounding settlements. The Duke noticed that Hamelia was extremely agile. His skin, like armor, swords, and arrows, would not help to cope with the monster, but the Emperor objected that, judging by the records, the small detachment would be able to defeat him, especially under the leadership of the great warrior. The Count of Calabria will accept the fight with the monster for the opportunity to help the suffering. But Duchess Floyd objected that the Count should not be in danger because he was appointed to the imperial throne. The Emperor said that it was by this Count of Calabria that it was better to get close to the princess than to fight Himalaya. In the near future, Ryan should definitely become the fiancé of the princess. In His Majesty's opinion, their alliance should unite the empire. Listening to the conversations, the Duchess thought that the princess was in too much of a hurry and used clumsy methods in an attempt to put pressure on her father. She realized that the marriage of her son and the princess was not the decision of the emperor, it was the idea of the princess herself. Meanwhile, the emperor went on to say that the dukes had an important choice to make in the interests of the empire. He proposed a vote. Those who are for the wedding of the count and princess steal white jade, and those who are against it steal pink. Duke Pedro Sr. noticed the gloomy appearance of the Duke of Calabria. Now it became clear to him that the Count did not want to marry the princess. Duchess Minaj stared thoughtfully at the stone in her hand. She didn't want to make that choice. One of the voters expressed his opinion, saying that he found it strange to hold a vote without its participants. The Duke of Calabria abruptly besieged the speaker, advising not to challenge the emperor's decision but simply to obey. The emperor interrupted the disputants, promising to talk to Ryan after the vote and leave it to him to decide. The Duke of Calabria chuckled in his mind, thinking that he was trying to resolve all the contradictions in this way. Pedro Sr. said that he wanted to end what was happening as soon as possible and return to his residence. The Duchess of Minaj, talking to the Duke of Lower, insisted on voting against the marriage. But her interlocutor objected, arguing that the marriage between the princess and the count served the interests of the empire. But if she wants to object, she can do it first, the Duke continued. Minaj really wanted to object by speaking out against it, but considered it extremely dangerous. The situation was heating up by the minute, and the dispute threatened to escalate into a conflict that was fueled by the Duke of Calabria. But Duchess Floyd intervened in the conversation. She loudly stated that there would be no vote, and she did not agree to this marriage. Duchess Minaj supported her, referring to the laws of the empire that protect the free will of the nobleman. Duke Lauren supported her by placing a pink stone on the table. The emperor looked at the results of the vote. They still do not decide anything. Those present made their choice despite their differences. The majority was against the marriage. The Duke of Calabria shouted angrily at his wife after the meeting. He was outraged by her refusal to support her son's marriage to the princess. Duchess Floyd sharply besieged the Duke, saying that in her absence he could do anything. But she would not allow the Duke to turn her into a puppet under the guise of feigned respect. Duchess Floyd explained that she was not against the wedding, but would make her decision after talking to the Earl and the Princess. Leaving the last word behind her, the Duchess hurriedly departed. She was about to leave the palace when the Duchess of Minaj called out to her and asked for a meeting. But Lady Floyd said that she had already made an appointment, and Duchess Minaj decided to clarify with whom. Duchess Floyd said that she was going to Baroness Eleanor. Lady Minaj was surprised that Lady Floyd knew where the Baroness was now. To this, the woman said that everyone knows where the famous Baroness is at the moment. The Duchess agreed to meet after everything settled down. Duke Lauren found Lady Minaj very excited after meeting Duchess Floyd and asked her what she was thinking. The Duchess drew attention to Lauren's condition and clarified why he was so angry, because in her opinion, everything went well. It turned out that he was very worried about the rumors about the vow. If Ryan was bound by him, all their actions would become useless. The rumors seemed fantastic. They couldn't believe that the Emperor could do it without thinking. The Duchess thought about the current situation. In her opinion, the Duke of Calabria was ready to sell his son for less. The marriage of the Count to the Princess united the Calabria and Floyd families with the Emperor, threatening to create a powerful alliance. In her opinion, it remains to understand how Ryan will act in this situation. The Count of Calabria was expecting the most important audience of his life. He was invited by the Emperor. The maid who entered the room informed Biancasta of the visitor's arrival, but the girl did not want to receive anyone. The maid insisted that the girl should get up and meet the guest when she asked who had come. To this, the maid replied that the guest did not introduce himself, but handed over the book and noted that he and Bianca had previously met. The girl recognized the book. Its author was Baroness Eleanor, whom she tried to poison. Feeling the unpleasant sensations, Eleanor involuntarily grabbed her stomach, and the maid became worried. But the Baroness reassured her by saying that before certain days, her stomach hurts a little, although there is a slight delay. Eleanor completely changed her image and asked Graham if she looked like her old self. After refusing to meet, the Baroness bribed Lady Biancasta's maid for 10 gold pieces. Looking after the servants, the Baroness thought with regret that the rumors that Bianca was not treated as a lady were true. Seeing the signature in the book, Biancasta was convinced that the Baroness had sent it personally. The girl shuddered when a strange girl entered her room. The woman who entered noticed that she looked as if she had seen a ghost. The stranger calmed the girl, saying that she was not a criminal. Frightened to death, the girl asked Biancasta to take her hand. Eleanor calmed Bianca by saying that she didn't want to hurt her, she just needed to take her hand, and they had very little time. As soon as the girl touched the Baroness's hand, it was immediately clear that she was under a spell. And they also saw a thread that could lead them to the one who cast the spell. Eleanor decided to call the girl to follow her where the thread led them. The Baroness did not understand why Bianca did not want to follow her, but the girl explained that she was ashamed because she had poured poison. Eleanor said that she knew Bianca had not done it of her own free will, so the Baroness offered to help her. Realizing that the Baroness could help her, the girl burst into tears, and she said that she would do everything in her power. Both girls watched the red thread that was supposed to lead them to the spellcaster. As expected, the trail led them to the Emperor's palace. Now it remains to understand who cast the spell. The Baroness assumed that Duke Pedra of Skye had decided to kill her, but Bianca replied in the negative. The girl realized that her poisoning was organized by the princess, who put a spell on the poor girl. Bianca burst into bitter tears when she could not confirm this, and Eleanor began to console her. She knew what she wanted to say. The Baroness understood the danger of the situation and began to persuade Bianca to hide. The girl needed to disappear from the princess's sight, otherwise the villainess would continue to control her. Then the girls decided to pretend that Bianca was kidnapped by an unknown guest. Leaving the residence of Lady Bianchi, the girls did not encounter any obstacles on their way. If they hide unnoticed, no one will be able to understand whether the girl was kidnapped or she escaped herself. Moving away from the house, Bianca looked bad. It was clear that she was under a spell. Eleanor suddenly coughed and traces of blood appeared on her lips. This was a consequence of poisoning. Fortunately, the Baroness was not hurt, and the girls could continue their journey. Getting into the waiting carriage of the Baroness, the girls moved towards the main gate. The guards guarding the gate calmly let the unfamiliar carriage of a noble lady pass. Pleased with herself, the Baroness was glad that she had managed to kidnap Biancasta. With a sigh of relief, Eleanor finally took off her wig, which had been boring for all this time. Now the girl was thinking where she could hide the kidnapped Bianca. To her regret, Duke Pedra's intentions were unknown to her, and she could not trust him. Eleanor knew she needed to find a shelter where she could hide and be safe. Then, she remembered the key that had been sent to her along with the letter. The girl called Graham's assistant and said that the situation was very dangerous and they needed to hide. Eleanor announced her decision to take refuge in the Chancatour Hotel. She realized that hiding Bianca was too drunk. When she arrived at the place, she could not believe her eyes that this magnificent place was open to her and they would be able to hide there. The road to the hotel was difficult and the girls were very tired. Eleanor regretted letting Graham go. The Baroness enjoyed her vacation and admired the garden. She really liked that it was so big. In the darkness, the girl heard her name and turned frightened at the voice. Blaine came out to meet her and asked her not to be afraid. He said that the Count told him to keep an eye on her. Seeing Biancasta, who was lying unconscious, he wondered who this girl was and if she was alive. Eleanor said that Lady Weiss was alive and needed to be carried inside. Hearing the Baroness's request, Blaine clutched his head, Bianca's presence suggesting that another guest would appear at the hotel. He told Eleanor that Duchess Floyd was also here, so they had to be extremely careful. This news frightened the Baroness, and she asked to borrow a carriage, but the Viscount said that this was impossible and they would have to stay. Looking at Bianca, Blaine said that the Marquis Weiss would turn the capital upside down in search of his daughter. The young man was outraged that the Baroness decided to kidnap the girl. As Blaine helped the guests sneak into the hotel, he revealed that the place now belonged to Ryan. The Viscount secretly accommodated the girls in a hotel and asked them to be extremely careful. After settling into her apartment, the Baroness changed her clothes clean and surprised Blaine with her choice of outfit. After informing the Baroness that her clothes would soon dry after washing, he inquired about Bianca's condition. Eleanor replied that she had wiped it with a towel after a long journey, and now the girl was sleeping peacefully. The Baroness asked how things were outside, and Blaine replied that the Duchess's guards had surrounded the hotel. He once again asked the girl to be extremely careful and not to attract the attention of the Duchess. The Viscount was looking forward to his friend's return. He could not foresee that the situation would become so complicated. He doubted whether he would be able to protect the Baroness until his friend returned, because the outcome of his conversation with the Emperor was still unknown. Blaine noticed Eleanor's tired look and told her to rest. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the door opening, and the Viscount involuntarily blocked the Baroness with his body. On the threshold of the room stood an angry Duchess Floyd with a lantern in her hands. Seeing the Baroness behind Blaine, she sternly asked who the woman was. The young man hoped that the Duchess did not know what Eleanor looked like and said that it was his beloved. Lady Floyd looked surprised, and Blaine proudly said that he was very popular with women, but the Duchess said that the face of Baroness Eleanor was already familiar to her. The women remained in the room, and Blaine carefully closed the door behind him. He was worried about the Baroness. Duchess Floyd suggested that the purpose of the Baroness's visit to the hotel was to remind Ryan of herself or seduce Blaine. The Duchess also made it clear that she knew about her visit to Duke Pedra. Eleanor said she didn't want to make things worse with her answers. But the Duchess continued to insist that the girl reveal the true reason for her appearance. Looking at Eleanor, the Duchess said that she knew that the Baroness had been with her son on the night of Danube. The Baroness thought that her safety depended on her answers and that she had to restrain herself. Realizing all the risks, Eleanor decided to ask for protection from the Duchess. Lady Floyd was surprised by the Baroness's strange request, and she asked why she should fulfill it. The Baroness replied that if she did not get help from the Duchess, she would be forced to turn to Ryan. In response, the Duchess said that she could kill her right now, and Ryan would soon forget about her. The Baroness did not argue, but drew attention to one circumstance. According to the Baroness, his relationship with his mother will not be the same after that. Eleanor went on to say that Ryan would be disappointed in a person he trusted. Then the Duchess asked the girl what was the reason why she left her son after spending Deneb's night with him. Eleanor replied that she did not want to impose herself on Ryan, taking advantage of his nobility, and insist on living together. But at the same time, she is not going to lose what she built with such difficulty because of one night, the girl added. The Duchess took the Baroness's excuses for a lack of fortitude. To the girl's delight, she allowed her not to leave the hotel until she made a decision. The Duchess had not yet made up her mind to take the Baroness under her protection. She needed to think about it. The Duchess noticed Bianca sleeping and asked the Baroness who the girl was. Eleanor calmly replied to the Duchess that she had kidnapped Lady Weiss and was now hiding her. The Duchess asked why she had done this and why she needed a girl with a bad reputation. The Baroness replied that Biancasta had tried to poison her and that she needed to find out who had ordered her to do so. The Duchess concluded that this girl was perfectly able to get into difficult situations. Leaving the Baroness's apartment, the Duchess advised her to keep an eye on Bianca so that the poisoning would not happen again. After seeing Duchess Eleanor off, she breathed a sigh of relief at the moment she had saved her life. The Emperor listened carefully to Ryan and asked if his decision was final. The Count replied that he did not intend to change his mind not to marry the princess. Ryan was well aware that if he married the princess, he would not have to fight Himalaya. In turn, the Emperor reminded the Count that it would not be easy to defeat the monster. The decision to betroth Ryan and the princess was made a long time ago, the Emperor recalled again. Ryan replied that he could not propose to the princess because he did not love her. The Emperor asked the Count if he had another reason to refuse to be engaged to his daughter. Ryan replied that the Emperor was right. He had a beloved woman and she would marry only her. The Emperor angrily exclaimed that Ryan must act in the interests of the Empire. To this, the Count replied with a request not to force him to change his mind anymore. The Emperor ordered Ryan to leave, and Count Zeppelin closed the door behind him, left alone with the Emperor. He began to persuade the Emperor to postpone the order, but the Emperor intended to send Ryan to Himalaya urgently. The Emperor ordered that the Baroness be taken care of as soon as the Count left the capital, and added that he was not interested in public opinion. The Earl then suggested that the Emperor use the oath to demand obedience from Ryan, but the Emperor replied that the oath was in Irene's possession and he would never be able to betray her. He cannot reveal this secret if the princess finds out about the oath that the irreparable will happen. Back at his castle, Sky Pedra found that Eleanor had taken advantage of his absence and escaped. Duke Pedra was very surprised to learn that the Baroness had kidnapped Bianca Weiss. The servant reported to Sky that the Baroness and Bianca were now at the Chankatour Hotel and that Lady Floyd was also staying there. The Duke was also informed that the hotel in which the Baroness was now staying had been bought by a certain Eli Metson. Sky asked for a description of the person who had purchased the hotel at an insane price. The servant said that he was a handsome young man in expensive clothes, which he hid with a long cloak. Upon receiving this description, the Duke immediately guessed who the mysterious buyer was. He remembered that the letter he had given to Eleanor had a key enclosed, and most likely it was for a room in this hotel. When asked by the servant why Sky had given the letter to the Baroness, he replied that he had no other choice. The Count, along with a letter to the Baroness, sent a message to Sky, in which he wrote that if his instructions were not followed, he would appear himself. Having done everything as Ryan requested, the Duke did not allow him to meet the Baroness. Sky calmly let Eleanor go because I'm sure Ryan will never get her. The Duke came to this conclusion after listening to conversations in the Imperial Palace. He realized that the Emperor would not allow the Count to marry Eleanor. For now, Sky was going to wait quietly for Eleanor to come to him herself. He was sure that the Baroness would soon appear to him one way or another. Sky learned that a huge number of people had been thrown into the search for Bianca. The princess personally visited the Order of Knights to organize the search for her best friend. The princess ordered the knights to deliver it to her if the girl's corpse was found. The Duke wondered why the princess had asked for the corpse to be delivered rather than save her friend at all costs, and he ordered a servant to keep an eye on the search. He saw that a few days ago he had met a baroness who was reading a magic book. The Duke remembered exactly that she had read the chapter on the Threadstone. According to Sky, events unfolded in a very interesting way. The Duchess of Menage and the Duke of Lorraine watched the bustling people in the courtyard of the Imperial Palace. They speculated about what the Count of Calabria could do in the current situation. Suddenly, Ryan himself appeared in the palace and his presence interrupted their conversation. Duchess Menage invited Lorraine to talk to the Count to learn about his plans firsthand. After exchanging greetings, the Duchess invited Ryan to talk for a while. The Count kindly agreed to the conversation, asking what it would be about. Lady Menage asked Ryan directly about the truth of the rumors that he was in love with the Baroness. Ryan answered her question as frankly as possible that the rumors were absolutely true. Duke Lorraine had heard that the Baroness was charming, but he wanted to know what exactly attracted Ryan to her. Ryan replied sincerely that he had many reasons to love the Baroness. The Count went on to say that he desperately wants to hug a girl when he sees her and marry her because of the emotions she evokes. Ryan's interlocutors were extremely surprised by his frankness. Lady Menage asked what he was going to do now, because his hobby contradicted his destined fate, but the Count replied that she was his fate and he would do everything to be with this woman. Lady Menage was once again struck by Ryan's frankness, and she decided not to change his mind, even to save him. Menage and Lorraine were well aware of the danger that the Count would be exposed to in making such a decision. Suddenly, Duchess Floyd joined the audience. She was the only person capable of influencing Ryan. The Duchess suggested that her son retire for a conversation before he made a decision. Ryan suggested that Lady Floyd had already met at Eleanor. The Duchess confirmed that her meeting with the Baroness took place, and in her opinion, Eleanor is a beautiful and brave woman. But Lady Floyd was worried about the risk that her son was taking for the sake of this woman. He would have to fight a dangerous monster. Ryan told his mother not to worry too much about this contraction. The young man promised the Duchess to clarify everything when he returned from the battle. The Earl appealed to his mother to protect the Baroness while he was away. The Duchess said that it would be difficult for her to protect a woman because of whom her son is in danger. Ryan contradicted his mother, saying that in time she would realize how beautiful the Baroness was. The Count insisted that if the Duchess got to know Eleanor better, she would definitely like the girl. The Duchess listened to her son's words and agreed to take the Baroness under her protection. After promising the Baroness protection, Lady Floyd asked when he was leaving, and the Earl replied that he was going on an expedition the next day. Saying goodbye to Ryan, the Duchess asked her son to take care of himself. She was very upset by his departure. When Blaine asked about Ryan, the Duchess replied that he was determined to defeat Hamelia. Talking with the Duchess, Blaine admitted that at first he was not delighted with the choice of his friend. Having learned more about the Baroness, he realized that society was imposing a wrong idea about her. Blaine told him that Duke Pedra confessed to him that there was nothing between him and the Baroness. Lady Floyd was surprised, because the Duke could get any woman, and now the Baroness interested her. Bianca finally woke up. After a long rest, she felt much better. Seeing Eleanor come to visit her, the girl showered with thanks and apologies. But the Baroness stopped her, saying that she had guessed the intrigues of the princess, in which she had involved the poor girl. Lady Weiss was grateful to Eleanor for her salvation and understanding. Bianca really wanted to repay the Baroness, who was also her idol. For a long time, the girl's friends were her favorite books written by Eleanor. The Baroness said that she was very pleased to see her admirer, but she wanted to understand one issue. It was important for the girl to understand how the princess blackmailed Bianca in order to force her to commit this assassination attempt. Eleanor noticed that the girl was very excited, and she assumed that love was involved. Bianca admitted that at the celebration of the princess's birthday, she met Eunice and the young man became dear to her. The girl really wanted to protect her beloved until the princess got to him. Bianca and Eleanor agreed to act together. Oddly enough, they became friends. Blaine came as soon as Eleanor called him and listened to her request. She asked for her message to be delivered to the Duke of Pedra. When Blaine began to object, she replied that it was very important. The Baroness revealed her suspicions that Ryan was under the princess's spell, and Skye would help her solve the mystery. To prove her point, she showed Blaine a strange stone that could be used to trace the spell. Blaine understood why the Baroness needed Duke Pedra and his brilliant knowledge of magic. The young man agreed to comply with the Baroness's request, promising to personally deliver the message despite the danger. In return for her help, the Baroness promised to pay off the debt by introducing Blaine to beautiful ladies when she returned to high society. Eleanor breathed a sigh of relief as Blaine went to Skye. She made the decision to save Ryan. She planned to deal with magic with the help of Duke Pedra, and Eleanor really hoped that the princess would not get to Bianca. Staying, only the Baroness relaxed a little and put her thoughts in order. Suddenly the silence was broken by the sound of the door opening. When a man in a long cloak appeared in the room, the Baroness thought that Blaine had forgotten something and returned. Eleanor was mistaken. The Count of Calabria appeared in front of her. He greeted the girl and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Barely holding back her emotions, Eleanor asked about the purpose of his appearance. The Count replied that he missed her very much and could no longer restrain himself. Keeping his eyes on Eleanor in love, he said that they needed to talk. The Count wanted to say a lot when they met, but the words flew out of his head at the sight of the Baroness. Eleanor decided to listen to the Count. Now he is in a dangerous situation, and it is possible that she will not see him again. The Baroness asked the Count about the dangerous plan he was developing. The Count replied that this was a necessary step to provide a guarantee of safety. Ryan confessed to the Baroness that he had already informed his parents about his refusal to marry the princess. Eleanor tried to stop the Count, convincing him not to put himself in danger because of one meeting. But the young man said that he fell in love with her much earlier, when he saw her crying in the garden. At that time, he did not dare to approach the sobbing girl because he was afraid of rejection, Ryan explained. Later, Ryan was very sorry that he had not approached the Baroness, missing the opportunity to get to know her better. But by chance, Eleanor herself came to him, and when he recognized her, he was very sorry that he had not found the girl earlier. But now confessing his feelings for the Baroness, Ryan decided to do everything to be able to be with her. The Count said that he would stake everything for the love of Eleanor and promised to keep his word. But now the Count has an urgent matter, and he is forced to leave it, leaving the capital. Eleanor was worried about the Count. Realizing that his departure was associated with danger, she wanted him to reverse his decision. Ryan said that he had made a decision, and it was impossible to cancel it. He was obliged to leave. The Count was worried about the safety of the Baroness. While he was away, the girl would be defenseless. Therefore, he asks Eleanor to accept a brooch with a seal from the imperial family. This powerful symbol of power, affirmed by the imperial family, will allow it to remain protected. He explained to Eleanor that if the seal remained with her, his knights would obey her orders without question. The Count assured the Baroness that if he had this seal, his subjects would defend it at any moment. Ryan is very worried about her safety and will be calmer if she is protected while he is gone. Greatly embarrassed, the young man asked Eleanor for another favor. The Baroness said that she was ready to listen to and fulfill any of his requests. Ryan walked as close to Eleanor as he could and asked for permission to tie her up. His request surprised the girl very much. She was confused, and Ryan continued to watch her reaction. He repeated his request once more, saying that he really wanted to knit it with the help of one object. Ryan opened the box, which contained a necklace of amazing beauty. Carefully putting the necklace around the girl's neck, Ryan said that he bought it at an auction especially for her. When the Count touched her while buttoning his gift, Eleanor felt very excited. Feeling that Eleanor was agitated and trembling, at his touch, Ryan asked what was the cause of her condition. He put his hands on Eleanor's shoulders and said that from now on, she would no longer be able to remove the necklace. The Baroness knew a lot about jewelry. She understood that it was a historical value and told the Count about it. Ryan told the Baroness that the ancient lord had ordered it for his queen. The best masters of the empire worked on this masterpiece. The Count confessed to Eleanor that he did not know much about jewelry, but this jewel as if it was specially created for her. The Baroness thanked Ryan for the gift and said that from now on only he would be able to remove the necklace from her. Ryan could not take his eyes off Eleanor. He wanted to stay with his beloved. The Baroness also did not want to part with the Count, but he had to go. Ryan expressed hope that when he returns, Eleanor will be with him forever. The girl was completely sad at the thought of the breakup and the danger that Ryan was exposed to, but he said that he would definitely return. Ryan touched Eleanor and could not tear himself away from the girl. He knew that now was not the time to talk about it. But emotions prevailed over reason, and Ryan confessed his love to the Baroness. On the day of his departure for a dangerous mission, Ryan was collected and more beautiful than ever. The Duchess of Manhwa drew attention to the Count's magnificent appearance, watching the preparations from the window. Lady Manhwa still could not believe that the Count of Calabria had decided on a dangerous campaign for love. She asked the Duke of Lawrence if he had a lady of the heart who would make him think of such a recklessness. Claude replied that there was a lady he was interested in, but did not want to discuss it with the Duchess of Manhwa. But Lady Floyd continued to insist that Claude give her beloved's name. The Duke of Lawrence said that it was only his business. He wanted to keep his sympathies a secret. Their conversation was interrupted by the muffled sounds of familiar voices, and the couple decided to listen more closely. In the hall, they saw Duchess Floyd and the princess. The conversation between them was very emotional. The princess begged the mother of the Count of Calabria to dissuade him from carrying out a dangerous mission. The Duchess replied that in the current situation she could not oppose the decision of the Emperor. Watching what was happening, Duke Lawrence and Lady Floyd noted that even in the current situation, the princess could not let Ryan go. The princess complained to the Duchess about the Emperor's refusal not to send Ryan to fight the monster. He says that there is no other way out. The Duchess harshly interrupted the princess's complaints and said that there was a way out, and Irene herself should tell the Emperor about it.